you for the reminder.
Sure thing.
Yep,
So
we're all set to record.
Perfect. So thank you for that. And I did see that there is a virtual graduation that's happening tonight. It was certainly not the intention to compete with that, but to welcome folks who are able to make this meeting. What I'd like to do, I had a conversation with Dan a little earlier today. Wanted to take one item out of order, and that is the update on the transportation settlement as it appears on the agenda. And Dan, I believe you are looking for Attorney Bartulis to be available for that conversation as well. Is that the case?
That's correct, Mike. So when we get to that item after discussion on the treasurer's evaluation and contract, Rebecca will give Attorney Bartulis a heads up, and he'll join us.
Oh, okay. So then we won't take that.
Well, if you want to do it now, we can. Rebecca can reach out to him now. Excuse me, now, and we can rock and roll.
Let's do this. If there's no objection, let's take the discussion of the treasurer's evaluation and contract first, and then let's take the transportation settlement question next. And does that give Rebecca a chance to give the Attorney Bartulis a heads up to be able to join for that?
That sounds good.
Done.
Perfect.
Done.
Super. Thank you. All right. So discussion, item 2, discussion of treasurer's evaluation and contract. It has historically been the case that in business and finance, the committee would review a draft evaluation of the treasurer who handles our checking accounts, for lack of a better way of putting it, and would offer any opinions on that evaluation, and also accept a recommendation on how to proceed with the treasurer's contract for the next year. This contract has been on a year-to-year basis for probably a little while now. Once we have those conversations, typically in the subsequent meeting, we would invite Treasurer Dunbar to come in, discuss the evaluation and the contract, and move on from there. So this is the point where Director Deedy has put forward in our packet an evaluation document. And why don't I turn that over to you, Dan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, everyone. So I may have jumped the gun just a tad, but I did meet with Treasurer Dunbar the other day, and I walked him through this the document here, and I accordingly gave him ratings for each of the duties here. I will say this, 50,000-foot overview is that Jim has done tremendous work. I mentioned it last year. I'll mention it again. And I speak to this, frankly, in the first area of responsibility. As I have reported to finance all year, and even this evening, and when you just look at the investments, especially in terms of the downturn in the economy, Jim's work, and I credit Jim at 1,000%, has exceeded our benchmark by 400+%. And I see that figure certainly as we come to the end of the fiscal year, going up ever so slightly, and I think that's a tremendous accomplishment to Jim. Jim has been a steadying force with myself, especially as we've navigated some challenges this year with Medicaid and the revenue challenges with that. And he and I have had numerous discussions relative to the anticipated rollout in FY21 of the 1/12 budget. Jim also is a tremendous communicator, not only with myself, but also with staff and the business office. At the end of the day, on the second page of the evaluation, my overall grading of Jim is he meets expectations, certainly my expectations. I would be happy to share any additional comments. Jim is aware that we're talking about this this evening, and we can certainly incorporate any additional comments that the committee may have. We can update this evaluation and share it with the committee at our next meeting.
So as we've done in the past, let's feel free to use the chat function to indicate whether or not you have a question. And I think most people are in the hang of this now. They've put themselves on mute and they're not talking. So way to go there. I'll give a moment to see if there's any questions in the queue regarding Jim Dunbar's evaluation or draft evaluation at this point. Dan, is there a recommendation from the administration on how to proceed with Treasurer Dunbar's contract for next year?
So the administration this evening wants to withhold that discussion. In speaking with Superintendent McCall this afternoon, we will have a recommendation for you at our next meeting once we finalize the financials. Obviously, we're looking to extend the contract. The question is, what is the value of that contract?
Okay. So as a matter of fact, I think that we will probably want to have that conversation again here in Business and Finance, and then once that's agreed upon with the committee, we can subsequently look to move forward with Treasurer Dunbar. So do hope that if we're not able to have that conversation tonight, that we're able to have that at whenever our next Business Finance Committee meeting takes place.
And I'll just sum it up, Mike, by saying we've got the district has a very good guy in Jim Dunbar watching over the finances. Very good guy.
Yeah, I will go on to say, Dan, that in the 6 years that I've been on school committee, I've been on Business and Finance all 6 years, and have very much found that to be the case, even from a committee member's perspective. So if he wants to come back, I do hope that we're able to work with him and look forward to resolving his contract and his evaluation again, hopefully at our next meeting.
Agreed. Thank you. And I'll share those comments with him when he and I catch up tomorrow.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So moving forward with the plan that we discussed, it looks like Attorney Bartulis was able to join us here. And so we'll, unless there's any objection, take item 6 next, which is an update on what's referred to as transportation settlement. So why don't I turn that over to Dan?
All right. Thank you again. And good evening, everyone. Good evening, Joe. Good to see you again. Let me just get us down to that that part of the agenda. So I wish to bring forward to the full committee a counter proposal from Mr. Ernenwein. Again, he wishes to engage in the district with the settlement of 75% of the daily rate, which was negotiated between the district and himself this past spring. He's also offering to freeze next year's contract. That would translate into a savings of approximately $116,000 in change. If we take the offer of the 75-25 proposal, we have a savings in FY20 of approximately $300,000. Add to that the freeze in FY21, we pick up again approximately $116,000. $416,000. So approximately $416,000 between the two figures. This is his final offer, and it is administration's recommendation that we go forward, that we support this agreement that was negotiated. And for those who may be new to this evening, I negotiated this settlement along with one of my colleagues. We represented 13 districts in Central Mass. Again, this was undertaken at the request of the DESE, whereby districts were asked to partner with their neighbors who have a similar transportation company for the purpose of negotiating a settlement to ensure that provider, whomever they were, would be available upon return from our leave. Originally, as we all know, we were scheduled back in early April. That was postponed to early May, and then we were shut down for the year. Again, the intent was to ensure that the provider would be available to districts upon their return, again in April, May, and in this case now late August. So it's our recommendation to go forward with this, to include in the proposal the freeze for next year, realizing savings of $116,000 next year. I know Attorney Bartulis is here. Joe, do you wish to add anything to that? Did I miss anything? Joe, I think you're muted.
So I'm happy to answer any questions anybody might have as to any kind of aspect of this agreement or any of the statutes or any kind of case law, whatever questions anybody might have. I'm happy to kind of give you some thoughts or answer any questions you may have.
So thank you, Dan. Attorney Bartulis. Any questions from any of the members on the line? Malaya, you have a question?
Yep, I do. I just wanted to clarify. Does my reading of this mean that we be paying him only through the end of, I think May, or the end of what would have been the school year, and we would not be paying him through the summer?
That's correct. So the settlement involves 62 closure days.
Okay. All right. And do we have then a thought on what this would mean if school is closed again in the future? Because if he's reducing his rate already, does that lock us into a position where we won't have any room to negotiate if we're closed in the future?
So the agreements that are being negotiated through the end of the fiscal year, Mr. Ernenwein, AA president, looked to, for lack of a better term, sweeten the deal, to bring the deal to fruition by offering to freeze next year's rates. In the unlikely event that we don't return to school in the fall, that would be a separate discussion altogether with Mr. Ernenwein.
Thank you.
Okay, I have Ben, and then Ben, then Linda, then Carl.
Thank you. Two questions. One is at one point we discussed the fact that if he was going to apply or receive any additional money for being part of some government assistance, we would get a portion back.
That is correct, and that was built into the draft agreement that was presented a month or so ago.
Okay, now and are we expecting him to just let us know, or is that public record? How would we? Do we know if he's applied for it, I guess, is the first question.
So that's a great question. And we don't know if he's applied for that, but certainly if there is a settlement here, and Attorney Bartulis and I talked about this today, in terms of the contract, we would look to amend the contract that had been presented to the committee, to finance subcommittee, because that contract, as it was written, was on the premise that we were returning to work again in early April or early May. So some things have happened since then, and we would need to factor that in, such as that point there where there'd be a check and balance, for lack of a better term. And we would put that, we would memorialize that in an agreement. Fair to say, Joe?
Yeah, I guess, can we, and this is a question for Joe, can we make this deal contingent on the fact that he will apply? And if he is awarded, then we would work with him on what that delta is. But part of what I'm kind of poking at is, you know, the wording we had discussed before is, well, if you get it, let's offset each other. But could we make this agreement contingent on the fact that that he will apply? If he gets it, great. If he doesn't, we have a deal in place and we're ready to move forward.
This is Linda. I hate to speak out of turn, but I thought that the agreement already said that he acknowledged in the latest agreement that he had applied. I thought that was part of the language of that latest agreement.
So let me step in for a second, right? So I think I think Ben's question is a little bit different. So in the draft agreement, as Dan has mentioned, there is language around the notion that if they were to receive federal funding through, I guess, the CARES Act or PPP, that they would return to the district the value of the funding that they've received, as it relates, I assume, to staff that work drive buses for the district. I think Ben's question is there a way through the contract of formalizing this process such that they are required to apply and update the committee on the progress of their application? Am I getting that right then?
Yeah, that's correct.
That's what I'm hearing.
So this is Joe. I'll step in. One of the points that I had made is, and let's kind of look at these on two tracks. So you've got one thing before you query whether or not you're prepared to enter into an agreement with this fellow at either 75% or some other number that you may propose. But the other thing is, this contract is drafted, respectfully, I think it was a little bit inartfully drafted, and it was drafted at a time when people were assuming that school would be resuming at late April or early May, as it were. As I mentioned to Dan, this agreement, in my opinion, if there is to be an agreement, would need some substantial rewriting, because now we know how many days were lost, right? 62. We know what the daily rate is. It seems to me all of these points would need, whatever the agreement would look like, need to be enumerated in there. With regard to the PPP, you recall, if I don't want to put you to sleep, but you've got this, there are a couple different loans that one would have access to. The PPP is basically a payroll replacement act, the Paycheck Protection Act, as it were. The other one is some, economic disaster loan run through the SBA. Okay. I have no idea whether this fellow has applied for those, nor do I have any idea of whether he's been approved. But beyond that, I think a careful reading of this document, it's vague as to what are the benchmarks, right, to determine what the district will get back as far as what this make whole was. It seemed to me like this was written with an eye towards multiple districts, and that it would be multiple money going back to multiple districts based upon whatever calculation this fellow did. So I think the long and the short of it is this: to the extent that you wish to go down this path and enter into this agreement with this fellow, your point is a good one, and it was one that I was thinking as well, which is you need to know with precision whether he's gotten these loans and whether any of that money would be coming back to you. Just for talking point purposes, we're reminded that the PPP loan it's basically 10 weeks of salary replacement. 8 of those weeks go directly to the employees, and the other 2 weeks of payroll could be used for other things. They recently, in the last 10 days to 2 weeks, they passed a relief act which basically widened or broadened what you could use the funds on if you, A, haven't yet spent the funds. At the time the PPP was originally drafted, it envisioned that you had to spend the money right after you received it. So effectively, if you received the money on a Friday, you called the employees back on Saturday, and then they were supposed to be being paid, right, effective that following Monday. The PPP didn't go into existence until around April 7th. So that would have been the earliest that anybody could have gotten a PPP loan. If they got it and it was effective April 8th and you got the money on April 9th, in my hypothetical, you count 8 weeks out to that, that gets you just to last week. That would have been covering their entire payroll. So to the point whoever posed the question, that's an excellent question. And I think before you pen any agreement, you're going to want to know those variables.
Thank you for that. And just to remind you that if you're not talking, if you could mute yourself, as there is feedback coming through the line. I have Linda, then Carl.
So I'm looking at the version of the agreement that we received on the May 20th meeting, I believe. And in section 7, about midway through the paragraph in that section, it says, as such, AA Transportation Company Incorporated hereby notifies the district that the company has applied for an SBA loan under the CARES Act. He doesn't mention PPP, but he does mention SBA. AA Transportation Incorporated will notify the district upon receipt of notification of forgiveness of any portion of said CARES Act loan or receipt of any other similar stimulus grant. Further, if the federal stimulus forgiveness or such other grant and or forgiveness received by AA Transportation in combination with the payments agreed upon in paragraph 5 above, received from Wachusett, other school districts and other customers exceed what would have totaled expected revenue had the governor's mandatory closure not occurred, then AA Transportation agrees it will return such overpayments to the town/district as either a cash payment or credit towards future services, as agreed upon by the town, district, etc., on a pro rata percentage basis. So I thought that was part of the agreement already. He doesn't say anything about applying for PPP, as I said, but he does seem to indicate that he does notify us that he applied for the SBA loan, and that he will notify us of what he calls forgiveness. I'm not sure if that's the right term, of any portion of said CARES Act loan or receipt of any other similar stimulus grant. He says forgiveness of any portion of the loan. He doesn't say notify us of the loan, which is kind of interesting. But so it seems to me like there is already something in there about notifying us, or acknowledging that he's applied for at least one funding source, notifying it, and saying that he has to notify us of at least some aspect of the interaction with that funding source.
There is, Linda. I'd like to make it just a little bit stronger language. Again, I would work with Attorney Batulis in terms of what that language would be, to make it, I guess, seal tight, for lack of a better term.
All right. I do think this can be tightened up. I sure do. I agree with that. So I'm happy to hear that you want to do that. It just wasn't clear to me that people were understanding that there was already at least something in the contract about that.
Yep, there is. We ensure that that's the case. But again, that was a number of weeks ago, and certainly through the negotiation process, and as you noted, as Joe has stated, I think that we can certainly tighten that up considerably.
Okay, good. That sounds good.
To our advantage.
Good. I do have one quick follow-up, which is, what was it? I had it. Oh, somebody else go, and then oh, yes, I know what it is. Does he realize when he says that he's going to lock in the rate for next year that we could have more busing next year, or just that the amount of busing that we need or may need is really uncertain? We may need more than we usually have.
He does acknowledge that. However, the offer is contingent upon the current configuration of busing at 49 buses. Certainly, if there is a need for additional equipment, number one, I don't think they would have that additional equipment here by September, just given the fact that the factories had been shut down, and though they may be back in operation, without having placed orders now, it's highly unlikely that we would have additional equipment in September or October. So his offer is contingent upon the 49 units that we currently have.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for that
All right,
clarification.
Member Ottmer, next in the queue.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, if I dropped out, my internet's been having a rough day. So if questions already been answered, then apologize for that. So just so I'm kind of clear with really the choice that we're having to make, or kind of us and then the full committee, really what to be voting on, based on kind of the feedback that this is kind of his final offer. It's really, our option is 75-25 this year, which is a savings of 380, plus lower rate for next year, which is 116 next year, 116K next year savings. So it's option one, which are the terms here, or because he's not going to negotiate anymore, we pay absolutely nothing, which is kind of the default. It seems like it is. I just want to see if that's kind of a correct assessment of the seemingly binary that we're at now, because he's not going to, because he doesn't want to negotiate anymore. So it's either we go with this, or we don't pay him a penny and we pocket our 1.8 million for this year and then kind of roll with next year. Is that kind of a correct kind of understanding of the kind of really the choice that we're facing now?
Pretty much. We're at the 75-25 with the freeze for next year. Or if the committee chooses something else, a different percentage, that is your choice, that is your desire. Today I did present yet a counter to the counter. And as I informed Chairman Dennis, as I informed Superintendent McCall and Attorney Bartulis, I didn't get 3 or 4 sentences out when he said, "I'm going to stop you here right now." And that was the end of that. This is his final offer. And if we choose not to pay anything, that is your decision. Or if we choose to pay something less, that is your decision.
So I guess as a quick follow-up, like, what would happen if, as the committee, we were to say 66% our final offer, and between the two of us, we just couldn't come to an agreement? Then by default, is that nothing? So
I'm gonna have Joe jump in here a little bit too, because we talked a little bit about this, and I think what Attorney Bartulis needs to present is what are the options in the event that we pay him less than what's on the table, in terms of our options. I mean, as I explained to Mike today during a conversation, the rhetoric has been ramped up considerably, and AA doesn't want to go down that crooked road, so to speak, narrow, crooked, bumpy road. He is committed to this relationship, but he has made it clear to me that if we can't come to some agreement, then he may have to do what he has to do. I just share that with you. And I shared that with Attorney Bartulis, and Joe, if you want to offer what our options may be at that point.
Thank you. So I'll kind of lay it out for you. Okay, so option one, of course, is to agree to the 75% with this fellow, and then revise these terms. One of the points that was made is it says he went for an SBA loan. Well, actually, the Economic Disaster Loan, or whatever it's called, and the Paycheck Protection Act are both operated through the SBA. One is run through local banks. But to my recollection, the only one that is forgiven or potentially forgiven would be the Paycheck Protection Act. So I'm inferring, because I've not spoken to the fellow from AA, that he was pursuing the Paycheck Protection Act. If he did do that, then he would have conceivably earned, if this is accurate, 8 weeks of replacement earnings for those employees. Query what that amount would be and how would that serve as an offset. As Linda pointed out, there's language in there about this grand calculation that talks about money going back to the districts, plural, meaning I guess all 13 that were part of this negotiation. And that makes me a little bit uncomfortable as to the nature of how that would work. This fellow hasn't even confirmed whether his loan has been approved and what he's spent that money on. So there's some parts to iron out as it relates to the 75% and what that agreement would ultimately look like. I think at the end of the day, if he were to get the 75%, I think, he would be agreeable to revising the agreement. Whether you'd ever see a dollar back from him as some kind of an offset, I have no idea about that, and I'm not holding my breath waiting for that. But I don't know this fellow, and maybe he would he'd come through on that. You can absolutely propose whatever you wish, and we could revise the agreement however you wish, but then I would present that back to him as to what that agreement would look like. If at the end of the day, he says, I don't care what you're proposing, we've got no deal. Well, what are your bookends? Your bookends are you owe him nothing, or you owe him 100% of the 62 remaining days, right? Of those 62 remaining days, that would be your bookends, 100% payment for those or zero. He's proposing that you pay him for 75% of those, with potential sweeteners of you getting some money back. Again, whether that would ever come to pass, I'm cautious with the way that this is worded, that may or may not be artfully stated in this agreement as proposed. Okay, but if he doesn't take the deal and you say, fine, take whatever action you need to, Ron, as you're ramping this up, he would have to sue you, and he would sue you for breach of contract. There were 3 defenses that you would raise in such an argument among potential others. The first one would be, and these are not in sequence, mind you, but that 4156 for the providing of the services, we didn't receive those, so we can't pay you. There was legislation change, but the change in the legislation simply said you may pay. It doesn't mandate you pay. The second defense would be, and these both go hand in hand, second and third, are the concept of impossibility and the concept of what's called frustration of purposes. And these are my terms, but these are terms of art, which basically mean that if something causes something that was unforeseen causes it that you can't deliver the students and we can't run the schools because the governor has told us we can't operate, your defense would be that there's an impossibility or frustration of purpose under this contract, and you may or may not carry the day on that. If you carry the day, you've spent nothing. If you don't carry the day, you've paid 100% of what he would be owed, not getting the discount of the 25%. Even if you do carry the day, and these are all beyond legal arguments, but if you do carry the day, query whether or not what that will do to the relationship going forward, what impact that will have from him bidding on your business in the future. Those may or may not be concerns of yours, but I'm just inviting you to keep those things in mind. So kind of that's where you're at. Whereas the agreement is paying him 75% right now, that's what you'd be settling on if you were to not roll the dice and tell him you're not paying him. It sounds to me, I've not spoken to him obviously, but it sounds to me like he's basically saying it's 75% or I'll see you in court. Is that right, Dan?
To paraphrase Joe, I mean, he hasn't said that verbatim, but I think that we're heading down that path. There was one other district in Central Mass that was in the same boat as we were. They have come to a resolution with him, and the rhetoric, my term, got ramped up considerably, he did threaten to pull the contract with my colleague. Again, didn't happen. They've come to an agreement, and they're moving on.
Now, I'm just going to pose, I guess, a question or an observation. But do we know? Let's just for sake of argument, assume that we don't know this fact, but let's assume that this fellow did apply for the PPP loan, which is the one that's forgivable, and he references things being forgiven. Mm-hmm. What that dollar figure represents and how much, if any of that, you would see back from him. It seems to me that those would be things that you'd want to be ironed out. We know that he's applied for it, but we don't know whether it's been approved and what that amount of money represents. But if it was the PPP, it's 8 weeks of employee payroll for the employee plus 2 extra weeks of payroll that can be spent on other things.
So I guess I'll take that. So the question from Attorney Bartulis, I believe, is directed to the administration, and it's a question that I had as well. Do we anticipate, or do we have an understanding of what the dollar value might be of an anticipated application for PP on his part?
We don't.
All right. So in the queue, I have some people who have asked for additional questions. What I'd like to do is go around, have a first round of questions asked before we get to the second. So I'm going to take Jeff and then myself, and then we'll go back for and Ken, and then we'll go back for another round.
Okay, thanks very much. Joe actually answered a lot of the questions that I was thinking about, particularly as it pertains to the legal ramifications here. When he talked about, if we were able to win an argument, if we chose not to pay, we could win the argument, we could lose the argument. I guess I'd simply like to point out that even if we won the argument, we could still end up losing in terms of time and money spent. And I'm sorry, Joe, no offense, but we could lose money and time even if we actually wind up winning. So I'm looking at those, and I absolutely hear the concerns about the language in terms of getting money back from the government. Personally, if we make that as tight as we can, as was discussed, to make sure he's actually applied and that we get feedback for what the dollar is. Between that and the savings for next year, I feel comfortable with what I see. Thanks.
So why don't we go to Ken, and then I'll go after that.
All right, so just quickly, I'm curious about the broader implications of this for other contracts and for future years. So I'll just lay a few questions out there and you can answer them. So I don't know how our bus contract is set up, if it's percentage year over year. So if we freeze this year, do those savings carry into the following year in terms of the fact that we've lowered our base? Or is it going to reset and we're going to see a sort of a doubling of the increase 2 years forward? So that's kind of question one.
And the answer is yes, Ken. I'm sorry, the answer is yes. You would see a doubling of the increase, correct?
I'm sorry,
Yes, we would see a doubling of the increase, correct? So the increase in FY22 would be as if we had an increase in FY21.
Okay.
That's how he's proposed it.
All right, I think that's just important to keep in mind, because that is, something we'll have to plan for in a year that's going to be bad too. Is this including regular and special ed transportation that AA provides?
No, these negotiations are solely predicated upon home to school regular ed.
So we'd still have to talk about the special ed that they do.
We would, but I would argue, as I think I've stated before, that whatever we do with AA transportation, regular ed, we would apply to all our SPED providers. AA does in district, Vanpool does our out of district, and I had very brief conversations with Vanpool prior to breaking those off, but they are fully aware of what's happening here. And I think it's something that, again, I don't want to speak for them, but I think it's something that Vanpool would be amenable to. But they're waiting to see what the resolve is here.
So you negotiated. I know there's lots of feedback, but you negotiated the AA just for home to school, and you're presuming that it'll be the same for their. So what would the special ed, just the AA part of it, since we can't really know Vanpool, what would the SPED part of AA be like? What more money would we be saving?
So with SPED in district, we'd pick up approximately $77,000. That's in district. He has an out-of-district route that is, he's got a couple of routes actually. So about $15,000 in out-of-district. A little bit over $100,000 in out-of-district.
For this year or next year?
Yes,
Or?
this year.
And then
The
freezing
offer
that.
to freeze, I'm sorry, Ken, the offer to freeze next year is only relative to regular ed only.
So he's not offering to freeze for the special ed?
Not yet.
This is Joe. If I may jump in quickly here, just to kind of make a couple points. So it is my suggestion, and I've mentioned this to Dan, that if there is to be a discussion about giving this fellow the 75%, that you absolutely would want to pen one master agreement, right, that would incorporate both the SPED and the other is the 75%. You don't want to enter an agreement for the one and still have to negotiate over the other. I think Dan's probably spot on that the fellow would agree to do the other, but why not address the elephant in the room by having that conversation with him at the outset and get that confirmed? I suspect that would be certainly okay to him. With regard to the freezing and then the next year, and I don't have the contract in front of me, but I guess one question I would have was, do we know for certain that he wouldn't be saying, no, I expect that the second year would be as if we hadn't frozen the first year or the next year, I'm sorry, and that I get effectively a double bump as to what I would agree. When I agreed to freeze next year, that's not necessarily saying he's agreeing that freeze then goes on in perpetuity, by meaning that the next increase builds off the freeze. If that's what we want to propose, you can absolutely propose that, but don't just assume that based only on, and again, I didn't speak to the fellow, so I don't know.
Right. So, Joe, I would argue that if we were to go forward with this, that all of this gets memorialized in a revised agreement that speaks not only to FY21 but also FY22 and if need be 23. That we revisit the contract, and this is where we're opening up the contract because of what he's offered and the impact it has on future years.
Well, so I guess just to finish on my last point, I would encourage, if it's possible, to consider the option that the 20, I'm losing track of what year it is, 23 builds on, 22 builds on 21's lower rate, rather than, if that's possible, because I just see us having a larger increase than we anticipate at this time next year. And if we have some leverage right now and we're giving him 75%, it would be good to see if we could, it's money he's not realizing for a whole year. So it's possible that he might be amenable to that, and it could save us in what's going to be a bad year going forward. So just my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. So I do have a couple of questions.
Please.
First, I think that it's helpful sometimes to talk about this in dollar terms rather than percentage terms. And so my understanding is that the non-special ed portion of the value of the remainder of the contract for services that were not offered or were not used, like this is a better way of saying it, is about $1.3 million. And so, 75% of $1.3 million is $325,000. What's I'm having trouble with and bothers me a little bit is that it seems like this conversation is upside down in some ways. And what I mean by that is I've heard Director Dede and Attorney Bartulis both say, I think, that we are under no legal obligation to pay them for services that they have not provided. And so this is $1.3 million that has come in through revenue to the district, of which one option is to roll the totality of the value of that into next year. A next year that consists of us looking at the potential, the very real potential of having up to $10 million worth of reductions that results in over 150 teachers being reduced and several other professionals and staff being reduced. In that context, if we have a strategic partner that says to us, look, this was unforeseen for everybody. However, we are in a situation Wachusett, where we have fixed costs that need to be covered in order for us to be ready to service you in the full way that we look forward to, we've serviced you in the past. Can we come to some agreement? That to me would start to sound like a principle-based negotiation and discussion. What we have instead is a negotiation that started at 80%, ended at 75%, and has now gotten to the point where he said, 75%, I'll freeze your rate for next year, take it or leave it, I might see you in court. That
If I may, just for a quick second, I actually looked to squeeze him at 66% in those negotiations. My colleague and I should say looked to squeeze him at 66%, and those did not work out. So we did push the envelope.
Excuse me, you went from 80% to 75%, right? So 75 is 5 less than 80. But again, what I would try to tie this to, if I'm negotiating with a strategic partner, is the principle upon which it makes sense for the district to redirect funds that could otherwise be used to offset reductions into next year to help out our strategic partner in an area of loss that is unforeseen, and perhaps looking at fixed costs as a way of doing that. What we discussed at our last full school committee meeting was the notion that his employees were put onto unemployment almost immediately after the stoppage of school back in early March. I'm not sure what incentive we would have to pay employees who were put, or to pay a provider whose employees were put onto unemployment shortly after the stoppage of work, where we have a number of employees in our district who are facing the potential of being reduced as a result of shortfalls that we're expecting for next year. So, quite frankly, I think that there's two models that we could have looked at this. One is from a strategic partnership perspective, where we try to have a principle-based negotiation and come up with something reasonable. And second is to be put in a situation where it's a take or to leave it at a level that I have to imagine is much higher than simply covering fixed costs. And that to me is not the activity of a good strategic partner. And I feel very less inclined to offer the district's funding in support of that. So having said that, I'll move on to next I have in the queue. I think I have Malaya and then Linda.
So I had two additional questions. One was about process, and I think that's mostly been addressed. I think hearing this discussion, it would have been really helpful to have a revised copy of all this language that you've talked about possibly revising. It would have been really helpful to see some of that language in a revised contract for today's meeting, so we don't now waste even more time with meeting after meeting revising it. I know everyone's really busy, but for me, who's visual, that would have been super helpful to know exactly what we're considering. However, the crux of the matter that Mike just explained is that we can't really, it sounds like we can't really change this gentleman's mind, and we kind of have a strategic decision about what direction to go from there. I am surprised to hear that he will not discuss lower than 75%, because at our last meeting, I believe you'd mentioned that you floated the idea of 50% with him, and he was amenable to discussing that once he heard from the other districts. I'm really curious what has changed in that, from his perspective. That seems very arbitrary.
So just a point of clarity, if I may, please. What I had said at the last meeting was that he was willing to have a discussion, period, once the other districts had, in essence, were signed, sealed, and delivered. He was willing to have negotiations, and that was what, a week or so ago.
Yeah.
Mr. Ernenwein, we spoke. Days run into each other at this point. The Thursday, Friday, I received something in writing one of those days. We had two discussions today. We had a discussion on Monday, and basically he had said, this is it. This is my final offer. and I'll look to freeze next year. So that's how things transpired in the past. I'll say 10 days thereabouts.
I appreciate that. And I want to be clear, I think you've been working really hard on this, Dan. I don't think it's you that has the problem. I think that except for not having a revised language to look at, I think that he has decided to dig in and put us in a very difficult position, which I think is unfortunate because I think between other districts and between, I think I'd like to think that in this situation, everyone would look for a way to meet their needs and not to make excessive profits. And I feel like from this and from things he's written online and his employees have written online on his behalf, I think he's looking to make profit. And that's really disheartening in this situation. However, having said that, I also think strategically, I also think we have to consider where this would leave us if we decided to not pay him at all. Because we know the struggles we've had in getting busing in the past and having other people bid on serving our district, and knowing that everyone in the state will be looking for additional buses and additional bus service likely as this situation evolves. I think that's a challenging situation, and I think he knows that. And I don't know really, I don't have an answer on where that leaves us, except that I don't think we can lose sight of that as part of the big picture. Unfortunately, he knows that, and I think he's using that as leverage, and it's very unfortunate that he's looking for profit above all else when we are having to cut jobs. But that's what I'll say for now. Thank you.
So just to follow up there, we continue to be beyond this year under contract with AA for, is it 2 or 3 years, Dan?
We've got, this is the first year, two more years, Mike, 2 more years. And then there are two option years if we choose to go down that road.
So part of this is, when you're looking at a decision, I think sometimes like this, and if if we're feeling is that we're backed into a corner, and it's either we agree to his terms or we don't, then there is a calculation to be made on what the probability of having that go the wrong way if you decide not to. If you're backed in that corner, you decide not to make a payment. So for Attorney Bartulis, I'm not going to ask you to answer that here this evening, but I do would be interested at a later point of learning some perspective that you might have in that regard. With that, we have Jeff has a question as well.
Thanks. I think it's been addressed, but I will echo what Malaya said. I am concerned. Not only am I concerned about the problem we've had with finding bus vendors in the past, and I understand there's a couple years left on this contract. However, if he feels that we are a breach of the contract, well, then what's to stop him from doing the same in terms of providing service? But beyond that, we are looking at a year that is going to be, shall we say, difficult at best in terms of trying to do all kinds of different services, including busing. In fact, that may be one of the most difficult. And I personally would rather go into that with a cooperative partner rather than one who is either looking to exit or in some other sour state of mind. Thanks.
Okay. Any other comments or questions?
Yes. So for me, it's sort of a question of are we more concerned about saving money in the short term than we are about having access to bus services with a bus company that's, from what you've said, pretty reasonable to deal with under most circumstances in the future, and also possibly incurring additional expenses in the future because he he might not be so interested in cutting us a break in the future, although maybe he never cuts people breaks. I don't know. So that's one, that's kind of what I'm trying to balance, is short term versus long term. I mean, it's possible still, I mean, who knows, but it's possible still that we could get some federal funding that would help us with our budget in the coming year. That maybe, it's hard to know if that's likely in future years. But it is possible we could get some funding in the short term. That's another factor. I am glad to hear that he's open to renegotiating or that we believe he's open to renegotiating the PPP or SBA money. I think that I think could be important. So I guess, what are your thoughts about this year versus, maintaining the relationship for future years?
I'm sorry, is that a question to me, Linda?
Yes.
Well, I'm going to defer that to the superintendent ultimately, but if you're asking me, that we go forward with the proposal on the table, 75-25, and that we also look to freeze next year home to school. And I'll even sweeten the deal and see how we can make further adjustments in the SPED contract, as Attorney Bartulis has noted, and roll it all into one package. But I'm going to defer the ultimate answer to the superintendent.
Yeah, so thanks, Dan. Linda, our issue is one, I think you said it well earlier in the statement where you said, is it short-term money now or long-term access to busing later? We're not sure. That's a great question. No one knows exactly what's going to go on. You've already mentioned no one knows whether or not we're going to receive funding from the federal government. I mean, it's probable, but it's not definitive. When we're talking about our relationship with the bus company, I think I mentioned this at one of the last business and finance meetings. AA has been very good to us. They've been very helpful, but this is a tough decision for us just in general. We want to ensure that we have the capacity to have our kids go back and forth to school next year in some form or fashion, and if it requires us to maybe not add buses, but add more time with buses, add more routes. If we split days. I think Ron could come back at us, and we could be looking at, further increases that we might not have control over, and he would really have us over the cliff. So that's when we're looking at this, we know. I understand. Geez, they didn't provide those services. Let's just not pay for any of that. I get that completely. But at the same time, I also know that we have to be cognizant of the fact that we have a bus company that we need in September. And if we, run into some major issues with transportation during the year, we could be penny pinched to death over that.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I don't think I had anybody else in the queue. I did have one other quick question. So, 1.3 is the non special ed value. What is the value of the remaining or the unused portion of the special ed contract with AA?
So the SPED in district, 100% is $310,000 in district only. So let's assume we replicate this. So it'd be almost 233,000, 75%, and we would pick up again almost 78,000, 77,604.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's SPED in district.
Thank you.
Thank you. I had one additional question.
Yeah, Ben.
Or comment. So I guess at the end of the day, I think I've heard a lot of comments, and we're in a non-enviable position. We're going to have to rely on this. company moving forward, and whatever we might get now, they, as Daryl pointed out, as the year goes on, we might get pushed small amounts until he gets that and more. So I guess in my opinion, I think we need to move forward, but I think a key piece of that is to, as Attorney Bertolo said, is we need to document what we would get back and have it very clear on exactly what the figures would be. And so that's really, as Joe, Dan, as you start moving down this path, I think that the key point is, at least in my opinion, is that we can go ahead and do this, but we need to really define that if he gets money, how much is it? How does that affect us as a school district, and how are we going to get that back?
Mhm.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
So just in closing, I would mention, this is Joe here again, Joe Bartulis, that to the extent that you wanted to make a kind of a comprehensive counter proposal to them, right, that kind of captures all the stuff that was discussed tonight, I could draft that. I could have something for you before close of business tomorrow that kind of captures the points that you have today. And we could get that out to you, and that might even spur more, thoughts that you might have about what about this, what about that I'm hopeful would address all of these things. And again, on the short list would be, you want to have a global settlement with him as it relates to regular ed and special ed. You want to be clear on what the freezing means as it relates to what I would call the out year, which would be FY22. You want to know with precision what loans he has gone for, what monies he's received, and what his kind of out-of-pocket costs have been, so that maybe so that those variables and what you might get back. Cynically, I'm always worried that you might not get $1 back, and so with that in mind, you want to keep all these things in mind. I can draft up language which we can then chew on if it be our pleasure, and I can get something out by close of business tomorrow. If that be your pleasure, that kind of captures what I think we discussed this evening. If the decision is that you would rather settle with him at 75% than roll the dice and run the risk of him suing you. If he sues you again, I've indicated you have some defenses, and your exposure would either be you owe him 100% or you owe him 0. But if we capture what you want, if you're willing and you're interested in settling with him, we can capture these other concepts that were discussed today, and I could get something out by close of business tomorrow.
So thank you for that, Joe. I mean, I think the administration's intent at this point is to bring a proposal to the full school committee, which meets next, I believe, on June 30th. The question of having you draft that agreement, I'll defer to the superintendent and Director Dede. But I do agree with you that it needs to have, in my opinion, those components that you mentioned, with the very clear precision. It needs to be comprehensive of both special ed and non-special ed. And I think it also needs to spell out, if there is some desire to have them apply for federal assistance, it needs to specify that. We need to understand what the value of that can be, and we need to have status back on its progress, as well as understanding how a fee freeze would play out in subsequent years. So thank you for that. Any final thoughts or questions on?
So I have to ask the question, please, with all due respect. At the end of the day, are we going forward with the 75-25 in freezing next year? And what if Attorney Bartul is, or when Attorney Bartul is prepares this document, then I'll run it by Mr. Ernenwein, Friday or Thursday, whenever. And he balks at that. Then what do we do? If he says, I'm not going to agree to that, for whatever reasons, then what do we do? Again, we have approximately 1.4 encumbered thereabouts with.
Yeah.
I'm just concerned that the window is closing. That's all.
So I guess I'll say two things. And again, if you're not speaking, I guess you should put yourself on mute because we are getting some feedback and we start to talk over each other. I guess two things. One, that my understanding is that this agreement would need to be approved by the full school committee. And so it's not within this subcommittee's body to be able to say to you tonight, Dan, definitively one way or another that we're moving forward or we're not. We can make a recommendation, but I think that there's still some cultivating of information. I mean, personally, for me anyway, I'd like to know, what some of the probability of some of our game theory is a little bit. But outside of that, I think the decision falls number one to the full school committee, and number two, I guess there's a couple things, and Ken can weigh on this as well. We have a committee meeting, full school committee meeting on June 30th. If we're afraid that the clock is going to run out on June 30th and he doesn't have an agreement and we're stuck, well, where does that leave us? Well, he's given us his answer to what we're trying to put forward. It sounds like the agreement that Attorney Bartulis is looking to craft is putting some fine points on some language, but it's ultimately built around the counter proposal that he's given to you. So to me, I think there's a couple pathways here. I mean, if you feel like there needs to be a full school committee meeting specifically for this issue, one can always call a special school committee meeting specifically for the topic. But I guess the other point that I'd make is that if he's boxing us in so tightly, I do wonder how much flexibility, how likely we are to have a positive outcome with him.
And I understand that, Mike. I do. I've lived with this for a couple of months, and I know how Ron thinks. And my only concern is, and Joe makes great points. He does, but as I've shared with the group, Mr. Ernenwein is reluctant to use an analogy, to open up the books, if you will. I'm just concerned that he may, just given my experience in negotiating this, is that he may balk at this. That's all I'm saying.
So Dan, what is it that you would like us to do tonight? It sounds like there's something that you're not getting from the committee that you'd like to have. What is that?
I was hoping, Mike, with all due respect, that at least there'd be a vote, not a vote, but a recommendation from the committee that says we're going to go down this road and let's get this done, or we're not. Again, the window is closing. It's June 17th. I've got an encumbrance of 1.4, and that factors in the 75-25. I've made that assumption. If this is going to be it, great. Or if we weren't to do something, and I'm just concerned that he's not, having lived this with him, that this is something that he's not going to adhere to. And again, I don't want to speak for AA, but I've been negotiating with him for 2 months. Mm-hmm. That's all I'm saying.
So Dan, what I'm having trouble with is, and again, we have a lot of feedback that's coming through. If you could please put your self on mute. I'll wait for a minute. Thank you. I guess the trouble that I'm having, Dan, is what specific aspect are you concerned that he's not going to agree to? And so what is the motion that you suggest? We don't have an motion on the agenda today. That's fine. What is the motion that you would like for this committee to consider and suggest that one of the members make? And then correspondingly, what is it that you're concerned that he's going to balk at, given that was raised in our discussion about how to proceed forward?
Sure thing. Thank you. And I appreciate that. Number one, that we go forward with the proposal that was on the table, the 75-25 split. And that we look at freezing, and that we also take him up on the offer to freeze next year, and we pick up approximately $116,000, realizing that may have an impact on FY22. understood. I think the more we put into the contract, and Joe, certainly we can have that discussion offline, in terms of AA reporting to us certain figures and certain federal dollars that he's received and so on and so forth, and how he's using them and so forth. I think I'll stand corrected. I think that he'll have some pushback on that, given the experience of negotiating the contract with them. That's all I'm saying. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I do. I hope that the agreement that Joe crafts, it may bring home the bacon. It may bring home the bacon.
But let me just, again, this is Joe here. So just so that I understand, Michael, and kind of what's going on here, does it make sense? And what I hearing, am I hearing that I should put together this revised draft that kind of captures the points that were addressed tonight. I can then send that off to Dan, and it can be forwarded to the rest of you folks. You can agree if it captures kind of the concepts we've wanted. That Dan could then on Friday, conceivably, right, reach out to this Ron and say, here's our proposal. It's the 75%, if that's what you want to propose, but here are kind of the four corners of what that would look like. Then if he gives the middle finger to that, the proverbial middle finger, you'll make whatever decision you wish on that point. Or if he says, hey, I'll play ball and you can negotiate clarification on these points, you'll know at that point as well. So these are your scenarios. I don't know. It seems to me that ultimately what you want to do before you do anything else, right, is to see what this revised document might look like, to see if it captures and addresses all of your respective concerns.
Right. So, Joe, thank you for that. That makes sense to me. However, I think what I'm hearing from our Director of Business Finance, unless I'm misunderstanding, is he's looking for this body to take some action tonight. And I think your suggestion is we identify what those four corners before any action is taken. But again, I'll clarify that this body cannot make a definitive decision tonight. We can make a recommendation, but that recommendation would be having not seen what those four corners look like. And so I think that your suggestion makes sense. Again, I will continue to defer to administration. What I've heard from Director Deedy is that he would like for this body to take some kind of action. If there is a willingness for somebody to make a motion, you can certainly, anyone can certainly do that at this point. But again, I hear what you're saying, Joe, and that to me as a pathway makes sense on how to proceed.
Right. I guess, Mike, could a motion be made to right now accept the 75-25, but request and the freeze, so the points that we've gotten, accept that to recommend to the school committee, but we also need Joe's finalization. So what it would be is accept the points on the table, as well as request Joe to add those four corners, so that could be validated at the next school committee meeting.
So this kind of discussion came up at our full school committee meeting, the last full school committee meeting, where somebody discussed the possibility of making a motion with contingency, and I'm not sure what that accomplishes, quite frankly. At the end of the day, we're saying we would recommend it if this were to happen. You could make that motion if somebody cares to make it. I'm not sure how much weight that carries.
Yeah, I guess I would phrase it a little differently. It's not if, it's we are recommending the 75% 25 split freeze. In addition, we are adding a clarification to section 5, 6, and 7 of the contract. we're not, if I understand correctly, our goal is not to change the contract, but just to clarify it. Because I don't think anywhere in this contract we are adding a payment. We are just saying, okay, you agreed to pay us. Now that we know that it's 62 days, let's put a figure there.
So to answer your question, I think that we've talked about this in the context of a settlement agreement that probably needs to have four different characteristics I've heard Attorney Bartulis mention. Right, one is that it's global, that it comprises both special ed transportation and non-special ed transportation. Two, that it takes into account freezes over the next year. Three, that it lists out a requirement to or spells out the boundaries of PPE. And four, it's very precise in terms of spelling out the dollars, which doesn't exist now. So, ordinarily, Ben, I think that we would have a proposal that might have one or all of those components. The proposal is clear, and we can take a motion to recommend that proposal move forward. It just seems to me that this proposal right now is generally vague until we've had the opportunity to add those clarifications. Having said that, if it's the will of the committee to put a proposal forward or a motion forward, you're certainly capable to do that.
I'm trying to figure out, how do we allow Dan to continue to negotiate prior to the school committee meeting?
So, I mean, what I can do, Ben, is again, certainly Attorney Bartulis can revise the current agreement, and I will reach out to AA, and I'll share the draft agreement with him. And make him aware that the 75-25 and the freeze next year is contingent upon these revised articles and this language.
So to me, that's the way that you move forward, is that we have the attorney revise the agreement, and we bring it back and saying, these are the four corners on which we've taken your counter proposal and let's formalize it.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, my mic got. So to Michael's point, before it seems to me, and again, maybe I'm putting the carriage before the horse, but does it not make sense that when we reach back out to AA, we say to him, here is our counter proposal that captures the 75-25 with these other concerns we have? I'm kind of grappling with the benefit of reaching out to him, somehow rushing to do that tomorrow to say we've got a deal or not on this 75-25 if these other elephants in the room aren't necessarily ironed out. Don't we want to reach out to him with the draft that would have that 75-25 in it?
That's my understanding.
Okay, good. Yeah, so we're on the same page then.
Yes, I think
That sounds right.
Yeah, I think what we're trying to figure out is, we, as Mike pointed out, our committee cannot approve a proposal. That's what the whole school committee needs to do. But we're still, I would say we're still in the negotiation phase. Now, if I understand what Dan wants, though, is he wants some statement from this committee so he can go back to AAA and say, okay, I've met with business and finance. They've agreed to these terms, and they're willing to put this in front of the school committee. But I need, we just want some clarification on these other terms.
That's correct, Ben, and I understand that this group here are not the ultimate decision makers. I do, but yes, if I can say to Mr. Ernenwein that I have the support of my subcommittee predicated upon this document here, that would be helpful.
So can I offer a suggestion to try to bring closer to this? perhaps entertain a motion to allow the administration to engage attorney Partoulis to update and prepare a revised negotiation document that reflects the concerns that were raised in our meeting this evening. It's a little bit general, but you understand where I'm going.
And then that would be sent to you folks by close of business tomorrow.
Yep.
I'm putting that out there as a suggestion. You can not take it, but if you want to take it, somebody would need to make that as a motion.
I was about to move it. I was about to move that motion. If what I had in mind was something like what I was going to say something was like a motion to recommend this 75-25 subject to clarification on the 4 points that have been articulated. Is that jive or?
Well, I didn't make a motion, and we're right now at the moment we're kind of freewheeling it, but that's okay.
Okay.
So if you want to make that as a motion, I will tell you that does not necessarily align with the motion that I made. I see those as being two separate and distinct motions.
Okay.
Personally.
All right.
But I didn't make a motion. I'm just offering that out there if somebody wants to make it.
Okay, I was thinking of the wording and I was listening to it at the same time, and there you see where my multitasking falls apart. But so basically, let me just stick with my first thought as just make a motion to recommend the 75-25 with the freeze on next year, contingent on the clarification on the 4 points that have been discussed by Joe.
I'll second that.
Okay.
Before you vote, may I just ask a question? To the extent that the document you receive tomorrow by close of business has 5 points in it, are you limiting yourself in today's motion by saying these 4 points? I guess that's just a question I'm asking, that I don't want to see you get boxed in by that. At the end of the day, what I think I'm hearing, and I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, is that you're on board with the concept of the 75-25 split, assuming that the document has all the things that you would like to see in it, whatever that looks like. And assuming it does, that's what you're on board with. Well, I don't know that it'll be these precise 4. It may be 5, right? You may have another epiphany on something else that you want. So I just invite you to keep in mind, I think to Dan's point, and I don't want to put words in Dan's mouth, but I think his biggest concern was, is there a receptivity to doing the 75-25? And I'm hearing that there is, but you want to make sure the language addresses your concerns.
Yes, this is Linda. Can I just
hold on.
Sorry.
So let's pause for a second. All right. So we have a motion on the floor. It's been seconded. Attorney Partoulis has given some feedback based on that. I'll go to the maker of the motion first. If you have any comments or discussion, and then let's raise hands in the chat, and we'll take the order that way.
Thank you, and thank you very much. And yes, what Joe said is correct. I'm not trying to pen us in on with the wording. What he said is exactly the intent. There are some questions that we've brought up tonight. I don't want this. I'm not wanting this to be a Pandora's box where it can be, a total free for all in terms of what other questions can come up. I think we've covered some critical points tonight. And if there's a better way, I think Malaya, I saw in the comments, has a way to clarify this. I'm eager to hear it. I'm not married to all the wording I put out there, but I think everybody seems to understand what the intent is. Thank you.
All right. So I have Malaya and then Linda, and I think if somebody wants to offer an amendment, they certainly can do that. But Malaya, I got you next.
I had an attempt, but I don't know if it's too broad. I don't know the right process since we now have a motion. So do I need to formally amend it, or can I just discuss my thought process?
So here's I offer a suggestion before I'll offer another, is that we ask Attorney Partoulis to give us suggested amended language to the motion so that we feel a little more comfortable. And then somebody can move, if they wish, to amend the motion on the table.
Mine was more broad, so to not specify, but address the basic two tenets that have been
Okay.
proposed to us. But I don't know the exact language that makes that useful. Is it to address them in principle, but not all the details? So I'm open to his suggestion if he has one.
So, Joe, do you have suggested amended language for us?
So I don't know the precise wording I would have, but I'm going to tell you kind of the concept I'm thinking of, and then again we can kind of massage this a little bit. But it's recommending the payment of the 75-25 split on a global settlement, right, with AA Transportation for regular and special ed services, contingent on the concerns that were raised tonight being addressed in that document and subject to the subcommittee's approval of that document. I get it. It's verbose. I get it. But I mean, that's kind of the concept, right? If you look at this thing tomorrow night and it looks copacetic to you and you say this captures all of our points that can be presented to this Ron. Now, if he's wedded to the 75-25, while he says he's unmovable, I'm viewing that. I've not spoken to him, but I view that as him being unmovable on the 75-25. I don't see him, I can't imagine him being so wedded that he won't agree to at least discuss, right, the language that we might put before him. And if he says, I'm not willing to discuss that, well, then you can make your decision going forward, ultimately, when it gets to the school committee, if he hasn't been willing to address those points.
So, I think the initial part of that was an attempt at amending the motion on the table. I don't know if somebody wants to take that up. Otherwise, I have Linda Long Balil next.
Well, I was going to propose a simpler amendment, which was with reference to the 4 points that were previously suggested in the initial motion, simply to say including but not limited to the 4 points raised in tonight's meeting. And the intention of that was to address the concern that there might be something else that would come up as Attorney Bartulis is redrafting the motion or redrafting the contract. So I just thought that the language including but not limited to would provide some flexibility that was needed.
So, for myself, I'm losing track of what the original motion was. So, Rebecca, do you happen to have notes on the original motion? And then perhaps we can understand Linda's suggestion of a modification.
Yes, hold on a second.
Thank you.
This was the motion by Jeff, seconded by Ben, to recommend the proposal of 75-25 with freeze for FY21 school year, contingent upon clarification of 4 points as discussed by Attorney Bartulis.
So, Linda, what's the part that you're planning or you're suggesting as an amendment?
So when she refers to the including the 4 points, I would say including but not limited to the 4 points.
Okay. Are you making that as a motion to amend?
Indeed, I am. Yes.
I would second that.
Okay. So now we turn our discussion to the amendment that's on the table. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Hearing none. Rebecca, do you mind calling the roll for the vote?
I certainly will. Hold on one second for you. Okay. Dennis.
Dennis, yes.
Mitchell. Mitchell. Ben.
Yes, I was on mute.
I'm sorry. Gustafson.
Yes.
Longbalisle.
Yes.
Haynes, which I missed,
Yes.
and Otmar.
Yes.
Okay, so the amendment has been passed. Now we'll turn back to the amended motion. So, Rebecca, would you mind just reading now the amended motion that's on the table?
Sure. To recommend the proposal of 75-25 with freeze for FY21 school year, contingent upon clarification of 4 points, including but not limited to, as discussed by Attorney Bartulis. I have to
No,
fix
no.
that up.
Yeah, it's including the 4 points, including but not limited to the 4 points. The including but not limited to goes
Yep.
before the 4 points.
Yep. So I will reread. To recommend the proposal of 75-25 with freeze for FY21 school year, contingent upon clarification, including but not limited to the 4 points as discussed by Attorney Bartulis.
I guess I would say additionally a clarification of, comma, including but not limited to.
Right, yes, I'm sorry, I had the comment there.
That's
Yep.
fine. Yep, clarification of, yes.
Yep.
Okay, any discussion of the amended motion?
Okay, Can I make a move to vote on this motion?
So, Ben, are you making a motion to call the question?
I am.
Which would cut, so the motion to call the question cuts off discussion on the amended motion. It's not debatable. If it were to be seconded, I believe it requires a 2/3 vote. Ken, you'll have to keep me honest if I'm wrong.
Yep, that's right.
Second.
Okay, since it's not debatable, we'll go to the roll call.
Dennis,
Dennis, yes.
Mitchell,
Yes.
Gustafson,
Yes.
Haynes,
Yes.
Long-Belial,
Yes, yes.
and Otmar.
Yes.
Okay, then,
So the motion to call the question is passed. We'll now go to a vote for the amended motion that's on the table, and we'll go to roll call.
okay, Dennis,
Dennis, no.
Mitchell,
Yes.
Gustafson,
Yes.
Haynes,
Yes.
Long-Belial,
Yes.
and Otmar. No, yes, Otmar.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes, Rebecca, I believe.
Yes, yep.
All right,
Passes
Thank
5-1.
thank you. Do we believe we have our next steps? Dan, do you have next steps?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I've got my marching orders crystal clear. I'll reach out to AA tomorrow. And Joe, you and I will catch up probably later on the day tomorrow.
Mike, can I ask a procedural question for Dan?
Sure. Go ahead.
It's Malia. I put this in the chat. I just didn't think you saw it. So I just have a
I
procedural
didn't see it.
question.
Actually, the question was called, so that's why we weren't called
Oh,
upon.
no, it's okay. I just didn't want to move on without asking. If our next school committee meeting is not until the 30th, does that put you in a difficult position if we're not able to pass this until the 30th? In terms of the bigger budget picture and having those funds encumbered pending this?
So if I may, don't fall off your chair, but I was actually going to recommend that when we get to the latter part of the agenda about our next meeting, maybe having something late next week, Thursday, if nothing else, just to talk about this, and I can share with the group, where we're at with this, so we know going to the full school committee whether he's on board or not.
So I think the inherent in Malaya's question is, do you foresee the need to have a full school committee meeting prior to June 30th? And, I guess the way that that's the way that I hear a question. But what I'll offer is, yes. I presume that if you feel that you need to, you'll reach out to Ken and ask if he would call a special meeting. I don't see the need. I mean, we'll know in the next couple of days where we are with that. I believe that we'll know by Monday or Tuesday at the latest. I think, and I can certainly communicate that with you, Mike, once I have that conversation with Mr. Ernenwine. Okay. Anything else before we close this one off? If not, thank you, Attorney Bartulis, for joining us tonight and for your help and ongoing help with this topic.
Thank you, folks. My pleasure.
Thank you very much. Okay. All right.
Thank you, Joe. I'll talk to you tomorrow.
All right.
Moving on. Item 3 on the agenda, fiscal year 20 budget update. We'll turn that to Dan.
Alrighty, so where are we with the presentation here? So just looking at the revenues very quickly there. I'll get down to my revenue sheet. Give me 30 seconds. There hasn't been a great deal of activity since our last meeting. I do want to make the committee aware of 2 changes. Number one, we received an additional $13,437 in homeless transportation that was deposited into our transportation account. And secondly, relative to the miscellaneous revenue, I had revised the figure. Again, the original figure was 439,000. And at previous meetings, I had revised that we would be well below that benchmark, but that I was looking at approximately 125,000. We've exceeded that. We've picked up approximately $5,000. So now we're looking at $130,000. At the end of the day, again, as you can see there, the Medicaid is going to fall below the benchmark of 1.1. And again, this is just the end result of what happened in fiscal year 18, and that is behind us. And that is a confirmed revenue figure for FY20, the almost 231,000, 238,889. That is confirmed. And again, the other issue was with the miscellaneous revenue for FY20. So the revenues, on the revenue side, we're looking at a shortfall of almost $360,000. Since it's there in front of you, and I'll get to this in a moment, but on the expense side, we're looking to have a balance of almost $907,000, $906,849. So at the end of the day, we're looking at a fund balance as of June 15th of almost $550,000, $547,898. This is a work in progress, as you know, given the activity, the ongoing activity on a daily basis of closing out purchase orders or reducing purchase orders, making adjustments, excuse me, between school choice or of a circuit breaker. And speaking of which, given the activity on the expense side that we've done to date, as of now, June 15th, where we're looking at a carry forward, unofficial carry forward in circuit breaker of $800,000, unofficial. And we are in the process of ordering PPEs, say that 10 times fast, for the SPED summer program. And I have an estimated cost there of almost $100,000. So that'll impact that carry forward. But still, we're looking at between $700,000 and $800,000. And then secondly, in school choice, we're looking to bring forward in school choice a balance of approximately $300,000 into fiscal year 21. I will jump down to the expense. And again, the activity that the transfers, I have some transfers here. We've got some savings, as I said, in instructional support. We'll move those up to insurance and benefits and insurance. Again, with the intent to build up the carry forward in next year. There's also a shortfall in other operating costs, given and again, that is the assessments for school choice out in charter school assessments. So we'll be looking to do a transfer there as well to cover that, other operations and maintenance. In terms of the 20 budget, we've topped off our oil tanks, approximately $80,000. So we can make that cut in FY21. And that'll help us to go a long way in terms of the oil for next year. I'd be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chair, or members of the committee relative to the FY20 update. Again, fluid numbers.
Thank you. Malaya, I believe you have a question.
Just a quick one. I was curious if we know how much of the Medicaid reduction is due solely to the situation carried over from FY18, or if a chunk of that is also due to reduced services during the closure, and if we have an estimate of that breakdown.
I don't have that breakdown, but I'd be happy to provide that for you at our next meeting.
Okay. Just curious for planning ahead. So thank
Sure.
you.
Yep, will do.
So Dan, I mean, just to answer that question, right? So we would be reimbursed next year based on the services that we applied for reimbursement for this year. Isn't that correct?
Right.
So to answer Malaya's question, isn't it true that the reimbursement reduction is 100% based on the activities from last year, and none of it is based from the activities from this year?
The reimbursement, in terms of, I'm getting the dates in my head mixed up here. I'm going to defer to Christine. Are you there, Christine? You can help me with those dates, those reimbursement dates. Chris?
I'm here. So we are reimbursed for, so I don't have it clear in my head either. And I can tell you while we were doing all the transportation stuff, my brain got even fuzzier. So what I understand is that the money we see is a projection of what our claims are. And then when we actually, it all gets adjusted for our claims, it takes a good like 9 months to do that, right? Dan, we're behind quite a bit. So like the submissions that we're submitting now during the closure actually we don't see that money till September, but we get some predictions of that money. And I can tell you that obviously we have slowed down dramatically, particularly for some particular students, although we were able to continue doing some telehealth for some of our kids. And we did start claiming more counseling during this time period.
So I think member Malaya Gustafson's question was, right now we're showing a shortfall in this fiscal year of $900,000 as it relates to Medicaid. And I think her question is, how much of that shortfall is as a result of reduction of services that we had for this year? But what I've also heard you just say is that we would be reimbursed in September for services that we're offering now. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is, isn't the answer to her question none of it? That the reduction in services that we're experiencing now is going to be impacted in the next fiscal year?
I believe that's correct.
That sounds accurate. So then I guess when we start discussing FY21, then I guess my question, the information from that question might still apply as we look toward next fiscal year. So we can figure out how much of a drop we will have due to reduced services during the closure. So yeah. I will appreciate the information at some point. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on fiscal year 20?
Yes, I had my hand raised.
Oh, sorry, Linda. Go ahead.
That's all right. So just to make sure I understand, we have 700,000 to 800,000 in carry forward from circuit breaker and 300,000 in carry forward from school choice. And so we have about $1 million to $1.1 million to carry forward, which if I recall correctly is more than we initially estimated. My recollection is that the estimate we had at the last meeting or very recently of the combined total of those two line items was about 700,000. And now it's between $1 million and 1.1 million. Is that right?
That's correct.
That's good news. Thank you.
Well, again, having been out for the better part of 3 months, that enabled us to pick up some significant savings.
Right. Yes. Thank you. That's great.
Okay. Any other questions? Anyone that I missed on fiscal year 20? Hearing none. Next item on the agenda is the entertain a motion to recommend to the full school committee a budget transfer of $148,000 from the instructional support appropriation to the benefits and insurance appropriation.
And again, the purpose of this is to build up the savings in school choice.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion on the motion? All right, Rebecca, we want to roll.
All set. Dennis,
Dennis, yes.
Mitchell,
Yes.
Gustafson,
Yes.
Haynes,
Yes.
Long Belisle,
Yes.
Otmar.
Yes.
Okey dokey.
All right, so that passes. Next, I'll entertain a motion to recommend to the full school committee a budget transfer of $20,364 from the operation and maintenance appropriation to other operating costs appropriation.
And again, this is the result of the assessments, school choice out, charter school, and having to make an adjustment in that appropriation. And this is a savings from operations and maintenance.
So
So
moved.
moved.
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? Not, we'll turn it to Rebecca.
Dennis,
Dennis, yes.
Mitchell,
Mitchell, yes.
Gustafson,
Yes.
Haynes,
Yes.
Long Belisle,
Yes.
Otmar.
Yes.
All right, next turning to item 5 on the agenda, request to transfer funds in the transportation stabilization. I'll entertain a motion to recommend to the full school committee a budget transfer of $150,000 from the transportation appropriation to the transportation stabilization account.
So before we discuss this, I have a question, Mr. Chair. I have here a recommendation of $150,000. And again, as we continue to clean up appropriations, clean up lines, you're going to be making a recommendation this evening, but if I were to identify an additional sum of money, let's just say it's $200,000 all said and done, can you make a change at the full school committee meeting to reflect $200,000 and not the $150 that I have here tonight?
So the the motion to recommend the full school committee is simply an indication to the school committee that business finance has looked at it. We've discussed it, however briefly, or in other parts of our agenda, and we're recommending that the full school committee take action. You can do one of two things. We can either move forward with the motion 150 if that's the number you feel comfortable with. You can always change or put a different motion on the full school committee, which is 200,000, and we can say, well, we approved 150, but now Dan thinks it's 200. Or you can just forego this motion altogether until you have better information about what it should be.
Let me ask this question. Is the committee in support of making a transfer into transportation stabilization, period?
Well, so before we have that discussion, maybe let's do this, Dan. Can you tell us why this motion is on the agenda?
Sure thing. So we're looking to utilize the transportation stabilization as a means to support the transportation budget for FY21. As I have reported even this evening, receipts in transportation this year at almost 84% certainly exceeded what was budgeted. So we're looking to take approximately $150,000, deposit into the stabilization account and use to offset the full transportation cost for next year. We can only carry forward this for 1 year, so whatever we deposit into that account for next year, we would need to utilize next year. And what I would do is that when we make the first payment for home to school in September or October, that we would access that account and clean that out first.
Okay. So, so Dan, I guess I'll go back to my question to you. I mean, the motion is here, it's in the agenda. Are we looking for somebody on the committee to make this motion, or an alternate motion, or no motion at all?
Let's make the motion at $150,000, please.
Somebody like to make that motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, let's go to Rebecca.
Dennis,
Dennis, yeah?
Mitchell,
Yes.
Gustafson,
Yes.
Haynes,
Yes.
Long-Belisle,
Yes.
Atmar.
Yes.
Unanimous?
Okay, so let's go down then to contingency planning for fiscal year 21. There is a subtopic of use of excess and deficiency, but before we get to that topic, I'll turn it to Dan and or Daryl to give an update on contingency planning for fiscal year 21.
So I thank you. I did have a conversation with the DESI relative to the use of excess and deficiency, and we may, with the full school committee's vote, access a sum of money. In this case here, $450,000 from FY19 certified excess and deficiency, and reduce state aid, in this case, Chapter 70. Reduce that by 450, make up the shortfall with the use of E&D at 450, and then to inform the towns. Our budget would remain the same, currently at $102 million, 102, 115, so there'd be no change to the budget. I was awaiting written documentation. This was part of a phone call, as I stated today, Mr. Chair, and I don't have the email confirmation, but I have the verbal confirmation as to the mechanics of that.
So before we go into getting some feedback here, so if folks could again put the on mute. Thank you. Before we get into the discussion on E&D, are there any updates with respect to contingency planning for fiscal year 21 that you or the superintendent wish to make?
So what I'd also like to say relative to FY21, this was not in my report, but there are activities that are ongoing. As I said a moment ago, in terms of PPEs, we are in the process of ordering the better part of $100,000 for the SPED summer program. The funding source for that will be circuit breaker. Secondly, our facility director, Mr. James Cavello, is also working on a detailed comprehensive listing of PPE materials. The funding source for that will be twofold. Number one, through the general fund, but also through a grant that Deputy Superintendent has submitted to the DESI. Number three, as I said a moment ago, Deputy Superintendent has submitted to the DESI a grant through the CARES Act. And that grant, in addition to supporting instruction in the classroom, will also support a goodly amount of PPEs relative to fiscal year 21. Daryl, do you want to update anything else in terms of 21 and contingency planning?
So, we're also looking at the, I know we had supported, the school committee supported the furlough days associated with the teachers union. Once that is finalized with the teachers union, that will save the district about $230,000, moving forward into next year. What Dan mentioned in terms of those items, are more around what purchases are associated with where we're going, and maybe not the savings per se. On the other end of it, we have looked at a couple of other different options, as I had mentioned before. The option associated with increasing some parking revenues associated with the district, at the high school. It's minor stuff. It's nothing that's going to be earth shattering in terms of the dollar amounts. So, by the time we're done, it's probably in the $50,000 to $60,000 range on top of where we're at right now. But those are the most recent items associated with any contingency. There is, I can tell you, I'm having conversations with WREA in reference to retirement incentive for the district, or for the teachers union, excuse me. We're in the midst of conversations, as I said. If that goes through, I'm not sure how many people will take it. We could have 15 people take it. We could have no people take it. I've been in contact with a lot of superintendents around the state, and it's purely dependent upon where people are in terms of age and eligibility. So, we are looking at that, and I've had Chair Mills and Scott Brown, head of legal, as part of those discussions as well.
Also, I want to point out too, again, I think this just shows that we're looking to turn over every rock possible. I was able to reduce the in our technology lease the interest rate from about 4.5% to 3.99. It's not a significant savings in terms of dollars and cents, but it's a sign, I think, that we're looking to overturn every rock. Secondly, I am in the process, and nothing is definitive yet. I've got a meeting tomorrow. I think it's at 3 o'clock in the afternoon with our copier provider. And we are looking to renegotiate that, and that could save us the better part of $50,000 to $60,000. Again, that's what we're aiming towards. It's by no means definitive. It's no means final. By no means final. But again, looking to turn over every possible rock that we can. I think when you've got 50,000 here and 50,000 here and 10,000 here, before you know, you've got over $100,000, and that equates into however you want to define that. So we're looking at all that we can to come up with savings and to move us forward into 21.
Okay, so let's do it this way. Let's first have a conversation about contingency planning, and then we'll take up the question or the discussion on E&D separate, to try to just be consistent in our themes instead of going back and forth. So I think, Malaya, you have your hand raised on some questions around contingency planning. You have the floor.
I do. I have several questions. I was hoping we might see an updated version of the document we've been working with, or even a more detailed version. Because what I've heard thus far is that even in the discussion of the revenues, you have, I think, $200,000 to $300,000 more dollars than you originally projected when you made that document. You're identifying 50,000 here and 50,000 there, and all of that adds up. And I would like to see how that translates to perhaps fewer teachers being cut from the budget. I really think we owe that to our community to have those updates in real time. I know this is coming, Daryl. I don't know which teachers have already been cut and which have not, and I think we also need that information just in our discussion going forward. That's not relevant to dollars right now, but in the big picture. But I think just in terms of seeing revisions about where all these little pieces are coming, $200,000 to $300,000, and you just described a little more. That's almost $400,000 right there, which is a tier and a half of teachers. That's at least the first tier, and probably some of getting into tier 4. I'd really like to see how that translates and how these positions are going to be hopefully restored, rather than this just being extra funds for things that we don't know about yet.
So Malaya, if I can just interject.
In the discussion. Yes.
Yep. So if I can interject quickly. So when we're looking at this, again, we have to take into consideration that, in that original tier, first tier, we put $450,000 worth of excess and deficiency in there, with the understanding that it may not be voted upon favorably. So, we have to ensure that we get the capacity to do that. So it's hard to do that in real time because it's all just conjecture associated with that. So if this happens, it makes it a little more challenging because we're not sure. Also, Dan's still closing up the book, so that makes it a little more challenging. So we're really not at a point where we can say, okay, because again, we're not sure. School committee might not support the 450. Well, all those funds that we just talked about are going to go back into that tier one.
Okay,
to
so
help support it.
So I appreciate that. So that's where the document that we discussed at our last meeting and our last business meeting about having the plan for how things will be restored as funds are found. If you have to adjust that, it would be helpful to know that you plan to adjust. If E&D comes out lower, it would go into tier one first. If
Yes.
we suddenly have more money beyond that, it would go into the positions in whatever section. It would be super helpful to have that as we're discussing this. So that we know that information.
So
Go ahead.
okay, and so just to tell you, when we're talking about money going back in, and I think I explained this before, and I think I said it to you, Malay, as well. When we're talking about the 5 tiers, we're going to hit up the tiers at the end first. So if we only get to the point where we're at tier 2, and then there's more funds that come in, we're going to go back up. And then we're going to, go through and add those positions back in. We won't be back in tier 3, 4, or 5 because we will not have made those decisions. Now, I do understand what your take is on how might those positions go back in.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be a larger discussion. Again, part of that is, that's going to be a challenge. That's, in all honesty, it will be a challenge because we're going to have to know what we have for funds before we can make, any wholesale decisions.
Okay, I appreciate that. I won't belabor the point. I just think I will reiterate it's very important in thinking about how to go forward to know where things would be moved if more funds become available.
Yep.
And even discussing E&D, it would be helpful to have that sense. My second question is a broader question related to the budget and not so much the reductions. But there's been a lot of discussion about if the towns pass the budget or do not pass the budget and where that will leave us. If by some amazing miracle, all of our towns pass, or 4 of them pass the budget, the 4 that are having meetings, or wherever, does that mean that then we are funding the budget as it was originally constructed, and therefore, for example, the positions in tier 1 that were taken out because they were new positions, would those be funded, or what would the plan be in that scenario? Would we then be committing ourselves to funding the budget as it was passed and then dealing with whatever state reductions we get from there? Or I'm just trying to understand that piece of the puzzle, because apparently there's people talking about passing the budget, which is great, but I don't know where that leaves us.
So the towns would be voting on the cumulative assessment figure, whatever that figure is for the respective towns, and they would be good. The state aid would be the unknown, and we would have to make adjustments accordingly. Again, we're making an assumption here that state aid is going to be reduced by 450, could be more. I mean, we've talked about a $6.2 million reduction in cumulative state aid, but we'd make up the 450 shortfall with the use of 450 E&D. State aid is the unknown. That's the wild card, and we would have to address that when we know that information.
But if the towns pass the budget, if they do, which we all would hope they would, does that then commit us to funding what was in that budget in terms of the new positions and all the textbook spending and the things that were in our plan originally? Are we then committed to funding those unless we have to reduce it due to state funding?
So good question, Malayan. No, so the way this works is that, and I think Dan was saying it as well. We're in okay, Ben saying he has to sign off. Thank you, Ben. So we're in a position where if the towns do support the budget, we get 4 of the 5 towns within the next 2 weeks to support the budget. It is at that 102, 115 number. If state aid comes in lower, the towns still pay their assessments in the same manner based upon the 102. and then our reductions would happen in the area of state aid. So it's in the same I think it's kind of in the same vein as a 9C cut. So if a 9C cut occurs, the budget's still the budget, but the state's just giving you less money than what you had originally planned for your budget.
So Daryl and Dan, I mean, isn't it maybe another way of saying this, and I think answering Malaya's question, isn't it true that the towns are going to vote not on the budget, but they're going to vote on their assessment? Correct?
Yes.
And so they
Yes.
pass their assessments. We know that we have the revenue that's coming in from their assessments. What we don't know is the other piece, which is the state aid, which was predicated on, on which our budget was predicated on both. So to answer the question, I think that at the heart of, Malaya, your question, is it a good thing if the towns were to pass the budget? And I would suggest that unless it was our intention to go back when we have a reduction in state aid and ask them for more in their appropriation, which I don't think that we were planning to do, then the answer is yes, absolutely it would be a good thing for the towns to pass their appropriation. Is that a fair way of putting it?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's the good way.
Thank you.
Ken, before you sign off, is there a clarification that you want to make?
Yeah, I just want to throw that to Dan, because I think the different towns vote on their warrant articles differently, and some separate MLC from the rest of the assessment. If it depends on how the state aid is changed, if the state holds the foundation budget the same, but reduces their aid, so the percentage from the state is different, that would change the MLC from towns. So depending on how the towns voted on their assessment, whether they vote on MLC separately or the net assessment, would really kind of change, I think, what their obligation would be. And I don't think all the towns do it the same way. So I just throw that out there for you to think about. But I think it's more complicated than the way it was presented. And it's even complicated on a town-by-town basis by how they rate their warrant. Because MLC will shoot through the roof for towns if they keep the foundation the same and just reduce state aid. Anyway, I just throw that out there for making things sound more complicated, but I think more accurate.
Well, I think it's a nuance, right, in terms of how MLC is going to be calculated for each town and the variables that are associated with that. But at the end of the day, you typically, I think in Holden, for example, there are 3 warrants that are typically put forward. And, you know, the 2 of them are compulsory and 1 is an operational budget, which is basically them voting anything over MLC, right? And so, you know, it's those 3 components that make up the total assessment. And typically with a variable, if I'm getting at the heart of your point, Ken, is the operational assessment, which has anything over the minimum level contribution.
Yeah, so I think this depends on how they word the thing, because if they vote for the operational, they vote for the operational, right? Do they put a sum total in their assessment in some other language, or do they not? Because the MLC, as you point out, is compulsory, right? So I just think it's complicated and I know what you're saying is correct in Holden, but I don't think all the towns actually word it that way. So I that's something that Dan would probably know much more about, because he's, you know, or he may not right off the top of his head. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I just think there is some nuance and complication to that. I think it would be good to pass the budget. The towns do vote on the budget, right? They vote on that top number and they vote on their assessment. And just the different towns word it differently. And I don't think it affects us much, but it would affect them potentially if it comes back and their MLC goes up, but they already voted on operational separately. But that's probably more the town's problem than ours.
Okay. I guess the question, Ken, at the end of the day, you know, sometimes I may be accused of oversimplifying, but if the question is it a good thing for the district, for the towns to pass this budget, I would still submit that the answer to that question is yes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. And that's what I was getting at. So I appreciate that. I was trying to understand if they pass it, if we are wedding ourselves to every line of it as we passed it, or if it's just the amounts. So that's helpful to clarify. Thank you.
Okay. I have Jeff next.
Perfect timing, thanks. One of the questions I really wanted to get to is, with the town meetings that are coming up right now, I strongly feel that there's going to need to be extra clarification at the town meetings. I'm not, especially right now, I don't feel qualified to answer what I would like to. Do we? Is there going to be anything in place at the town meetings to explain, particularly this year, what the vote is, what it's going to mean, what the difference between what we just talked about? I don't know how Rutland parses it out. It sounds like some towns are going to get burned if they approve this, if they approve the budget, and then the state bails on funding. And then the towns are left having to cover way more than they thought. I definitely feel like, I know Rutland's town meeting's coming up here in about 10 days. There's a strong need to help explain this year, especially for people, what the pros and cons are. And I don't know that, I don't know what the process for that is going to be.
Dan or Daryl, do you have any insight into that? Is there anything that the district is doing to be able to help answer any kind of anticipated questions?
Go ahead, Dan.
So I was going to, I'd like to see the respective warrants for the towns, and certainly we can prep based upon what's on the warrant, how it's presented. That's the first thing I'd like to do.
And again, so Jeff, what typically happens is that if there are questions concerning the budget, I'll be there, Dan will be there, and we have the opportunity to respond. We wouldn't typically do a presentation where we say, well, if you do this, this will happen. If you do this, this will happen. That's not necessarily our responsibility. Our responsibility is to go in there and talk about the school budget, and this is where we're at. I think everyone understands the issues associated with state funding right now, no matter what. And I've had conversations with all 5 town managers over the past several months, on many, many occasions. And it seems to me as though, and again, this isn't a direct quote, but they're not as concerned. They don't receive as much state funding as we do. That's really the short of it. And because of that, they're not as in dire a situation as we are.
Sure.
To take that question just a step further, right? So is the administration planning to have representation at each of the town meetings? And is there any value in preparing for distribution ahead of time, some type of FAQ sheet, given that I think everybody is going to have a very different place for where their head is at when they walk through those doors and vote on this issue. And to the extent that you have something in hand to be able to address some of the commonly expected questions, I might think would go a long way.
Yes, and we typically do that where we respond to some of the things that we would normally have in the budget. One of the issues that we're going to face, and I think I'm not sure who alluded to this earlier, but the way the budget is being played out right now, if it were 102, that'd be fantastic. But we know that we're probably not going to be at 102, 115. So some of the new positions, some of the other things that we had talked about moving forward for next year probably won't be, or won't come to fruition. So again, we'll put things in there in reference to the budget in the same way that we typically would. But I'm not sure where it's going to go ultimately.
So I'm not sure I heard an answer to the question. Right? So the question is, are we intending to have district representation at each town meeting? And are we planning to prepare in advance of town meeting some type of frequently asked questions that can be distributed to help level set people's information as they're going in and voting?
Yes and yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to every meeting. Dan's going to be at every meeting, and we'll have an FAQ real quick that we hand out. However, they're doing it because it's different in every community.
I would also, with that fact, I think what Malay said is right on. I mean, everybody in these towns knows that a boatload of some really good people have got pink slips, and they're going to want answers on that. They're going to want to know. I mean, it's going to be a difficult reconcile knowing that there are people in our towns who have pink slips, very worried that they're not going to be coming back next year. Some really damn good teachers, and on top of that, we are coming at them with this 102 budget. So there is a gigantic chasm between those two facts, and so that's why I think we need to be figuring out what we're doing. I mean, for a long while, it was just kind of assumed we were going to do a 1/12 budget, and it was just we stopped talking about distributing the budget book. We were going to do that, and then we stopped because, like, okay, well, the economy's falling apart, so we're just going to do 1/12, and that's that. Now we're having this conversation that, oh, well, wait a minute, it would be great if the towns approve their MLCs. We need
So Jeff, just to interject, we're still going to be on 1/12 even if they approved it. We still will start on 1/12. Every regional school district in the state's going to start on 1/12 because the state's not going to have a budget by that time, by July 1.
Right.
So we're there already. What we're doing is we're anticipating that the reduction in state funding is going to be less. So no matter what, we're going to be 1/12, even if we get 4 of the 5 right off the bat.
So I agree with Jeff that's confusing to folks. And so they're going to ask, why are we approving this budget that's not based on a 1/12 assumption if we're starting off with a 1/12 budget? We do have to explain that very carefully.
That will be. Sorry, Mike. That will be a. I'm just trying to think if there is a way for us to explain it in our FAQ. We will attempt to do that, Linda and Jeff.
Okay.
So can you, I guess just to follow up there, can you help me and others understand if we have 4 out of 5 towns, and I mean, I know that's a stretch, but if we have 4 out of 5 towns pass their assessments, explain to me why we would still be, that budget would not be adopted and we would still be in 1/12 budget?
I think the other reason is because we didn't have a budget in place by June 1st, and for that reason, we would go down the road of 1/12 at least for the month of July, and that's my understanding. But I'll stand corrected.
Yeah, but June 1st was a notification date, right? We had to notify them that if it appeared as though, and a lot of it was based on when towns were going to vote, because a lot of towns were pushing out town meeting, as you might expect. So that we were notifying them by June 1st if it looked as though we would go into 1/12 budget. 1/12 budget, it takes effect on July 1st. But if what we're saying is whether it's June 29th or July 5th, if we have 4 out of 5 towns that pass the budget, why wouldn't that budget then be adopted? I don't understand that. I can't figure that.
So the budget wouldn't be adopted at that time because we still do not have our state funding. Because the state has not dedicated funds, we're still looking. Our budget is based upon the governor's numbers that were presented back in January. We know those numbers aren't going to play out the way that I think people had thought they would. And then the numbers that will soon follow, we're hoping, will be up there.
What I'm having trouble squaring with that, Daryl, is, when was the state budget passed this year?
There is no state budget.
Right.
So there was when we say there's no state budget, I mean, there's a House budget, there's a Senate budget, they get reconciled, and ultimately the state has a budget, right?
Mike, when you said this year, were you referring to 20 or 21?
I'm referring to 20.
20,
Oh,
the
okay.
the
It
state
was like
budget was
September.
passed August,
September.
I thought it was August 1st or thereabouts.
Yeah.
Right, it was passed in September. So we didn't go into 1/12 budget and wait for the state to pass their budget until that time. Once we had a budget passed in our district, we had a budget. Now, we know that state funding is contingent upon the state passing their budget, which in 2020, or for fiscal year 20, happened in September. But that fact in and of itself didn't put us in the 1/12 budget. So I guess I'm having trouble
I see what you're saying.
reconciling that. And I guess I would suggest that before we make those comments, we ought to be damn sure that they're right.
Yep. I see what
That
you're
was
saying.
the nature of why I asked my question, because I
Yep.
don't want us, if the town's passed the budget and we are obligated to then work with that budget on that premise that Mike just explained very well, are we putting ourselves in a position where we have a budget we cannot fund if the state does not come through with their funds? And we have a bigger problem. So yes, I was.
All right, so let's get back to the queue. I have Carl, and then I have Linda, who's emphatic with her hand. I'll get you, Linda.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, my question actually really does kind of build off on that, and like the line in there about not changing the school budget, the 102 million. I think part of it was, and if my understanding of it is wrong, then that's kind of maybe something that we can root into the FAQs. Because my understanding was that with regional school districts such as ours, it wasn't that we are really electing to go into 1/12. It was that we were directed by the state, and so it's a little bit. I mean, it's a subtle difference to that, but it is a little bit of a difference there in that if it's self-imposed as opposed to being imposed from the outside. And so I guess it would be worth at least, I mean, is that correct that it was a directive from the state for us to go into a 1/12 budget?
The state had directed us to, if we did not have a budget by June 1st, to submit requisite documentation so that they could then develop a 1/12 budget. They're working to set us on a 1/12 budget. Because we weren't, we didn't have a budget by June 1st.
Okay, I had it was something that was kind of had been in the works earlier than that. So okay, yeah, certainly that can kind of at least tie into the FAQ. So thanks.
All right, got Linda.
I was going to say something similar, which was I thought I thought there was a state law or regulation or guidance from DESE or something that mandated that we have a 1/12 budget. But as I understand it, there was a mandate, but it was contingent upon not having a budget approved by June 1st. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Just a couple of questions, and hopefully they come as clarifications. But I guess, the one, I've talked before, and I know others have talked before, that there's a series of things that need to happen between now and when we return to school that are going to serve as triggers for our decision points. One of them, for example, is the date that a budget might be passed, right? Another is what's the last date that a town is actually voting on the budget, which is notable for us. So if one town doesn't pass the budget, we potentially could be waiting until the very end of August. And so we have, I think I'll speak for myself. I have asked for a timeline for decision points and triggers probably 5 or 6 times now. I didn't see it in this packet. When could we expect to understand what that timeline is, which I think gives us some clarity into when decisions need to be made.
So, Mike, the plan would be to have it by our next school committee meeting. So what that would be would, again, that would hold some of the, I'm hoping for some more information because this is tied back to budget, but it's also tied back to the opening of school. And DESE is coming out with more information. I had a conference call with the commissioner on Friday afternoon of last week, and there's more information coming out. So that'll be tied in with that as well.
So then let's clarify. I think that a lot of people, in our community, heard about, and the terms vary, right? They've heard of people being cut. They've heard of teachers being cut, non-teachers being cut, and I use the word cut because I think that's how some people are referring to it. So what we've looked at from the administration is a series of tiered reductions. What we have yet to understand is what are the different triggers for each of those tiers. And what we have yet to be able to square is what needs to be done procedurally versus what has been done definitively. What I mean by that is I believe that what happened on Friday was that teachers who have non-professional status were informed that they would not be renewed for next year because by statute, if it's our intention to do that, we need to do that by June 15th. That, however, does not mean that we have exercised tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, or tier 5 as of yet. It simply means that we have exercised those renewal slips, pink slips, because it is a statutory requirement to do so. Am I getting that right?
Correct. But what I can tell you is that any non-professional status teachers that were, and we did discuss this at the last business and finance meeting, any non-professional status teachers that were part of tiers 1 through 5 were included in that.
Understood. So again, procedurally, any non-professional status teachers that were listed or identified through those tiers were given a non-renewal sheet, a pink slip, for lack of a better term, because under statute, we're required to do that procedurally. The question is, does that mean decisions have been made on who has been cut and not coming back at this point in time?
Who has been cut? Okay, so
in other words, is it fair to say for the people who are going around saying that they have the administration has made the decision to cut foreign language in the middle schools and have made that decision? Is that a fair statement?
No, it isn't. So here's what I'm going to tell you. As we said, and I just said this, all non-professional status teachers who were in tiers 1 through 5 ended up getting the pink slips or the letters, with the understanding, and this is from our vantage point, with the understanding that because of the current budget situation, they've had to be let go. If we are in a situation where we do not have to get into tier 2, then what will happen is we will attempt to hire those people back.
Got it. So are there any people that have been identified in either tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 that are not non-professional status teachers who were informed that they would not be brought back for next year?
I think there was one teacher, but it was based upon the position, who was a professional status, but they are certified in another area. So they have the opportunity to take that position. So in the same way that I would, if we were to move a teacher if a teacher has a licensure in one particular place and we need the person in another place, I have the right as superintendent to move that person to the place in which I feel as though they would be, best assisting the district.
Right. So again, I think it's helpful, extremely helpful for people to understand, at what point in the summer are decisions taken up as to whether or not, to Malea's point earlier, whether there are non-professional status teachers that are brought back, perhaps because they're in Tier 5 and we haven't exercised Tier 5, or if there are professional status teachers or others that are in Tiers 1, 2, and 3, or 4 that have been exercised. And I think we need to understand what that timeline looks like. That timeline, to me, drives everything that we do. And so without having clarity into that, it's very hard to conceptualize how we move forward.
I hear what you're saying. I think, again, this is after having many discussions with superintendents from across the Commonwealth over the past 5-6 weeks. Most of us are in the same situation where we're, especially school districts who are dependent upon state funding for a large portion of their budget. We're all awaiting definitive numbers from the state. So at the same time, we also understand that, and I believe we said this last time, I think a member said, you could go all the way, with professional status teachers, there's really no notification requirement in terms of going all the way to the end of the school year. Or to the end of the summer. I don't plan on doing that. So what we will do is have like a drop dead date. If the budget is not done by a certain, is not finalized at the state level, and if we do not know what our state funding will be, we will have a date certain where we then have to follow through with next step.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're trying to get clarity into. I think that's exactly what we're asking for. I mean, what is the last drop dead date that we have to develop classroom rosters? What is the last drop dead date that we need to determine space plans if we're to plan for smaller groups? What are the last drop dead date if to make sure that we have appropriate levels of PPE in the classroom? So there's a number of different drop dead dates that we need to identify and lay out. And I think that's what we're asking and looking for.
Yep, that makes sense.
All right, I have Linda again, and then Malaya.
Okay, so two things. I imagine that the drop dead dates could shift a little bit depending on a number of factors. Does that make sense? Or
yes, that's one of the reasons why, again, it's we can't commit to dates in terms of, where we might be in July or, August. But what we can commit to is if we do not know what the budget is by this date in August, we will, we'll move forward with these processes because, and Mike mentioned it, scheduling alone at the high school takes at least 2 to 3 weeks. So
Right.
we make sure that.
Okay, thank you. And then the other thing was, are there any non-professional status teachers that were, in addition to those who were identified in Tiers 1 through 5, who we sent pink slips to?
No.
Okay, all right.
So,
Thank you.
so again, the pink slips went to people based upon the statute.
Right. I know. I understand that. Thank you.
All right, Malaya.
Okay, I know it's getting late, so I will very much look forward to seeing the list when it shows up, and also the timeline of the list of what has been done, so we know where they fall in the various tiers, and also the timeline. That said, I keep hearing us say we're turning over every stone, and I did want to reiterate, just because I haven't heard any further discussion about the idea of salary freezes with either teachers or administrators. I know you can't solve that today, but I did want to reiterate that that is a very large stone that has not been turned over fully. I know the union had things to say at the last school committee meeting, but I also have not heard Daryl speak on behalf of the administration about your willingness to also do what you're asking your teachers to to consider doing. And in my mind, if we're going to be talking about cutting positions and trying to minimize as much of that as possible, we really do need to be turning over every stone. And that is a very big one that we have not turned over. So I just wanted to reiterate that I hope we would have an update on those thoughts as we go forward in this process.
So is there a question for that, Malaya?
Well, I don't expect you to answer right now.
Okay.
I wouldn't put you on the spot, but I know at
Okay.
our last meeting, there was discussion of the fact that this has been discussed with teachers. A number of us expressed disappointment that they apparently don't want to discuss it yet, and that's the impression we got. But it was also put to you and your administrators that perhaps you should also be considering in solidarity with that request, a reduction or a freeze, not a reduction, but a freeze in salary. And I'd be very curious if administrators and teachers were willing to do that, how many more positions we could save as a result of that. So I don't expect you to answer that right now, but I do hope you're giving serious consideration to that as we consider literally every stone to save these positions and help our students going forward.
So Malaya, I can tell you, and Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe if we hold off on any COLAs or steps, and again, when you say administrators, we have an administrators union, but then we also have unrepresented. So there aren't a lot of unrepresented. There aren't a lot of administrators to begin with, so it's a small piece of the pie. We have 200 paraprofessionals. We have over 500 teachers. There are larger groups, but ultimately, I think it's approximately $1.8 million. Dan, is that correct?
That's correct. Yep, across the board.
Yep.
Across the board.
So that's for savings. So when we're talking about a savings, if it's a zero for everybody, it's $1.8 million. That $1.8 million is basically here too.
And my point was also reiterating what came up at our last school committee meeting, that there is the discussion with unions, but there also is yourself and other members of the administration who were asked that at our last meeting to at least consider that as well, if we are asking our teachers to consider that and consider that going forward. I do not expect you to answer that today, but I would hope that if we come back to that with our teachers, that our administrators, even that are not represented by the unions, would be considering that as well as we go forward. So that's all I'm saying on that. I don't expect to answer at the moment.
No, and I can tell you that I've had discussions with several unions at this time. And Jeff, if you're in the line, probably I think 4 or 5, and maybe even 6 by now. Sorry, and it is getting late, but none of them are willing to look at taking those reductions in terms of COLAs and or steps at this time. As they are unsure of the state funding.
I understand. I'm not going to belabor the point. It's late. My point was just to follow up on what was, hopefully there's some progress on that in the future. And hopefully, if we come to August and we do not have state funding yet, which we're not going to, everyone knows that as administration, you all would consider that as well in solidarity with what we're asking our teachers to consider. So hopefully that will come back and we'll be able to save some positions if necessary. That was my point.
Okay, thank you. So Malaya, thank you for that. Again, just a reminder, if you're not speaking, if you can put your microphone on mute. I have Jeff next.
Thanks. Picking up a little bit on Malaya's point. It was brought up in the last school committee meeting about when we talked about pay freezes for the staff and the teachers. There was a mention of the 7% increase in insurance costs, and I'm wondering if we could look. At what our savings would be if we did the freeze essentially, but allowing for that 7% to happen. In other words, allow for the 7%, so they're not being penalized for the increase in insurance, but beyond that, there'd be a freeze there. And I guess the other thing with that is I would simply say, I know there's a perception out there that we're trying to get to our budget number at the expense of the teachers. I would disagree with that simply because there's 40 million people unemployed right now. pay cuts, layoffs, furloughs, loss of benefits, loss of salary, loss of hours. These are things that I've lived here in this very house, and I'm sure many other people have. So the idea that any one group is being singled out is not accurate. The steamroller is coming for everyone. And the other thing I would simply say is that if we can get a number on that, that's a number that we can actually work with. That's a number we can plan with. That's a number that we can use to start looking at getting back some of the staff that we've lost. The state money is a big question mark. Federal money is a big question mark. These things we simply do not know. But that is one area where we could actually have a concrete answer. And so obviously, I would just ask people to give that a very hard consideration. And finally, before we go to the town meetings, I really, really, really feel that everybody who votes in those town meetings should know what the ramifications are for their town, how they vote. It sounds like from what Ken was saying that different towns have these things structured differently. And so whether you live in Holden, Sterling, Rutland, whatever, it should be crystal clear to everyone what's going to happen, how they vote. If they vote this way and the state aid doesn't come through, this is what it means for the town. If they vote the other way and the state aid doesn't come through, this is what's going to happen for the town. No one in this committee, I don't think anybody here wants to be in a position where the town votes to support the budget, and their reward for that, when the state abandons us, is that the town gets hit extra hard. I don't think anybody here on this committee wants to be facing that music. I know I don't. So I want everyone to have a very, very clear picture of what's going to happen when they go in and vote, because we owe it to them. We owe it to ourselves. We live here. That's
Jeff, if I can go back to your first question,
Sure.
and I was trying to understand it a little bit. So the 7% increase in health insurance, you were saying that if there was a way for us to cover that cost, they could take a COLA freeze and.
I'm sorry, I didn't phrase it very well. Thank you. Dan had previously provided a very clear breakout of the COLA, the steps, and the savings realized therein. And
Right.
I was asking if we could do something very similar to that, except for the difference being everybody should get that should get relief to cover. They should get the relief to cover that 7% on the insurance. In other words, if everybody freezes completely, they're taking a pay cut, right, because of the increase in insurance. So I'm saying, can we look at that in a way that says, okay, here is the bump that covers that 7% for insurance, and then the rest being the same. That's what I was trying to say.
Yep. Okay. Yep. I hear that.
Thanks. Thank you.
And again, the only thing that I would counter that with, and I'm just thinking about this logistically, is we've people that don't take health insurance, so
Okay.
we would be paying them, I would assume, the same difference. So
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah. I'm not. Yeah. Maybe that's a question you have to balance. How many of one versus how many of the other. I don't know.
right. Okay.
Thanks. Thank you, though.
All right, we got Carl.
Real quick question for you, and really this is probably more for you, Daryl. Do you, by our school committee meeting on the 30th, do you think that we'll have the results from the kind of the startup surveys that have been sent out to, as a parent, I know I got one in terms of for the fall and like conditions and all of that. And then I'm guessing probably one would have gotten sent out for the staff as well, just because the results of that survey are really going to inform a lot of what our startup costs look like. Because, for example, if we have 50% of parents in the district say, check that box for having a vaccine, then that's a large chunk of parents that aren't going to be sending their kids to school until there's a vaccine. And so I'm hoping that you got a lot of response that you're getting, and I think the survey is probably still open, but I'm hoping that there's a lot of response to that, because like I said, that information that comes back in terms of how many parents are thinking about keeping their kids at home regardless until there's a vaccine is going to affect, that'll kind of tailor what our planning for the fall is going to look like. So, and I don't know if we'll have that by the 30th, but certainly if we do, I think that would be good information to share with us to kind of help us starting to think about that, because that does kind of tie into the contingency and then some of the things that member Dennis had already talked about for costs for the fall.
Yeah. So, my plan would be, I wasn't necessarily planning on kind of putting all that out there on the 30th because I believe the groups are still going to be meeting, past that time. But I think Director Keenan just wrote on the chat that we have over 6,000 responses already. So it's easy enough for us to break the data down and get the information. So I can have that for my next report.
And I mean, even if it's just kind of like a high level picture of kind of what folks are looking at rather than really digging into it, at least it informs kind of how we're thinking about things going forward in the fall.
Yep. And again, just to reiterate, the commissioner has said, and he said it again on Friday, this is typically when he repeats himself, it's something that's going to happen. School districts will be mandated to do probably like 85 to 90% of whatever it is the state says that we should do, and we'll have 10% leeway. But what that does do is it puts us in a situation where, and again, what happened, I think a week and a half ago, there was some information that came out around PPEs, and it was more around summer, but there was a number associated with the number of kids who could be in a classroom of 10. Many people took that as, oh my gosh, September is going to happen, and you're only going to be able to have 10 kids in a school. And I think a lot of people kind of freaked out about it. But after our conversation with the commissioner on Friday, that wasn't the case. That's not the number that they were using. And in fact, they're going back through and they're looking at ways in which we can open. So there's going to be more information on top of the information that we'll put out there for people after the group finalizes some of this.
All right, ahead, Linda.
So to echo what Member Gustafson said about hoping that administrators would consider pay freeze along with everyone else, but also noting that, as another member mentioned, that everyone is getting hit to some degree or another. So it's not just one group, teachers or whomever. But then I just wanted to know, are we going to move on to E and D?
The intention is to move on to the topic of E&D if there are no other questions regarding contingency planning. Are there any other questions regarding contingency planning? All right. So, Dan, you started to give an overview of E&D. Do you want to give a brief synopsis of your overview for E&D?
Sure. So the administration is looking to recommend the use of $450,000 from FY19 certified E&D to be used in anticipation of a revenue shortfall in state aid. And in doing so, we would not look to increase the budget, but keep the budget the same at approximately $102 million, but reduce state aid and offset that loss of state aid with the value of excess and deficiency. And in the event that state aid were to come in at a rate higher than what was in the budget, that balance of excess and deficiency would fall to our bottom line in 21.
Okay. So there is a motion in the agenda. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, that this motion is the same motion that appeared in our last agenda and was voted upon in our last agenda. Is that correct?
It's the same motion to use 450 in E&D, correct?
Okay. So it would be out of order for a member to make this motion again, since this motion has already been made and voted upon. So if the desire would be for us to take this up as a motion again, a member could, and I'm checking my rule book here, either do one of three things. They could make a motion to reconsider, which can only be made by a member who was on the prevailing side of that vote, so somebody who voted no on this motion in the last meeting. They could make a motion to amend something previously adopted, since no action has been taken. And that requires 2/3 of the members to vote affirmative to amend, and then we need to talk about what the amendment is. Or there could be a motion to rescind the last motion, which again would require 2/3 majority to pass the motion to rescind in order for us to take up this motion. So having said all that, there's some different pathways here. I mean, if the desire is for this committee to vote on this tonight, there's two things. I mean, we can certainly discuss it. We can try to make a vote, but we would need to navigate whether we're going to reconsider, rescind, or amend. But the other thing that I would offer is that this vote has not been voted on by the full school committee. In fact, at the last school committee, the motion carried to move this motion to a point forward. So we don't have to vote on this motion tonight, I guess is what I'm saying. It's still going to appear on the agenda for the full school committee to take up, and it's not a recommendation to it's not a motion to recommend. It's actually a motion to adopt it. So with that said, I'll take hands in the chat. If you want to have conversation about it, we can have conversation. If you want to make one of the motions that I've talked about, we can make one of the motions. It's really up to the membership at this point. I'll also mention, just as a time reminder, that we are 9 minutes to the top of the hour, and if we were to extend beyond 10 o'clock, we would need to take a motion to extend.
I'd like to make a motion to extend.
So the motion has been made to extend the meeting to what, to 10:30?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Second.
So that is not a debatable motion, so we'll take it to Rebecca.
Dennis?
Yes.
Haynes?
Yes.
Gustafson?
Yes.
Long Belial?
Yes.
And Otmar.
Yes.
All right, so we are extended until 10:30, and my offer still stands. You can raise your hand in the chat. You can have discussion on the topic of excess and deficiency, or you can make a motion to try to resolve this if there is the desire to try to make a motion this evening.
I'd like to have a brief discussion about this.
Well, I take that, Linda, that your hand is raised, so go for it.
Well, as I recall from our discussion earlier tonight, we have at least $300,000 more than we thought we had to carry forward the last time this motion was made, and the last time we saw our tiered reductions framework, etc. So I'm not totally opposed to taking some excess and deficiency, but I am worried about taking this much. As I think Member Dennis, Chair Dennis has pointed out previously, this is about half of, or nearly half of our excess and deficiency. And that puts us in a bind later if we need more. And so although I'm willing to use some excess and deficiency, I'm uncomfortable using quite this much.
Any other discussion on the topic? If there's no other discussion on the topic, we'll move forward to our next agenda item. The next agenda item is recommendation of school committee approval. Recommendation of school committee approval of fiscal year 21 student activity funds and revolving funds.
So I'm gonna,
do you intend for another motion to be made tonight?
So just I scroll down here, and this is a listing of revolving funds and certain activities that the full committee votes on the meeting on June 30. Yeah, I'll get it straight, Dan. I shared these with the committee. These are brought forth each and every year. What I wish to just make the committee aware of is the fact that I have made reductions across the board in both the revolving and in student activities in light of this year, in light of losing the better part of 3 months, in light of unknowns for next year. And it's a 20% reduction across the board with each account.
So, Dan, what is the call? Is there a call to action for this committee tonight?
No, I'm not looking for a vote, just to share this with you, and if there is I guess a question raised at the meeting on the 30th, this committee has been made aware of these accounts that the full committee will vote on the 30th, and secondly, that you are aware that I've made an across the board reduction in each account to reflect the pandemic and the estimated loss of revenue in 21.
Are there any questions? I see, Malaya, you have your hand raised. I'm not sure if that was on a previous topic or this topic, but let's take this topic first. Is there any questions on this topic? None. And it sounds like somebody is washing lettuce or something. I'm not sure. That went away. Malaya, did you raised a question, but
It was on the previous topic on E&D, which I lost my connection during, so it's probably not useful since you've moved on. So,
okay,
sorry.
no problem. So if there's no other discussion on student activity funds and revolving funds, we'll move to item 9, approval of minutes of June 4th, 2020 meeting. I'll entertain a motion to approve the meeting minutes from June 4th.
So moved.
There.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion on the meeting minutes? Well, I had one. You know, as I look through, there's a statement on, hard to tell what page this is. I think it's page, I'll have to count them. Oh, well, wow. It's under section, section 5, contingency planning for fiscal 21 budget. And again, if you're not talking, if you can put yourself on mute. It is section 5 begins about 2/3 of the way down on the page, and then on to the next page. There's a sentence that or a paragraph that starts, per subcommittee chair Dennis is per chair say that 3 times fast. Per subcommittee chair Dennis, a good exercise to go through would be to look at any cash flow impact from 2008-2009, when the district was also dealing with severe budget constraints. I believe my point was that it would be a good exercise to look at what the reductions in state revenue were back in 2008-2009 as a point of reference for thinking about what our reductions could be for this year. And so I'd just offer, I think that I don't, I won't put us through the pain of doing a motion to amend, but I would offer that if that change could be made and we all agree on that, that we pass this motion with that change in mind, if people are okay with that. Any discussion beyond that of the meeting minutes or anything that I just speak crazy about? No? All right. So why don't we go ahead with the roll?
Dennis,
Dennis, yes?
Gustafson,
Yes.
Haynes,
Yes.
Long Belisle, Linda?
It
Linda?
looks like she's having a connection issue at the
Okay.
moment.
And Otmar?
Yes.
Linda, are you there? No. All right. All right. Next item on the agenda is the next meeting. Again, I'll look to the administration to advise on when would be appropriate for us to have additional information to bring forward and discuss in this committee. Hearing nothing more on that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
I think you are you second? Carl seconded. All those in, well, let's go for the roll call again, right?
Dennis?
Dennis, yes.
Gustafson?
Yes.
Haynes?
Yes.
Long Belisle? Nope. And Otmar?
Yes.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you soon.
Right.
Bye.
Whatever will I do with myself now? It's just 10 o'clock.
He just cut off in mid-fun.